a Trump tax permanent. Despite the existence of the expiration of these tax cuts within their 10-year window, they refused. They even refused to raise the top income tax bracket, despite all their campaign talking points. Instead, they passed the so-called Inflation Reduction Act and the so-called American Rescue Plan Act that led to reckless spending and record inflation. But Republicans are here to do our jobs. And our jobs, in this case, isn't out of discretion. It's grounded in statute. We're considering legislation that executes the instructions given to the committees pursuant to the budget resolution, one that passed both chambers and is binding on this body and the Senate. And our express purpose is this: to ensure that our federal spending, taxation, and other revenue-generating concepts align with the current needs of the American people. The American people and this government, by extension, cannot afford inaction. Americans need this legislation to ensure our economic survival and the sustainability of this Republican government. Americans cannot afford the largest tax hike in our nation's history. Americans cannot afford the runaway, endless spending machines that Democrats have enshrined via their policies. Americans cannot afford the inflation caused by the Democrats in the last 4 years. Americans cannot afford a soft, fragile embrace of President Trump's successful policies on the border, national security, and growth. Inflation has fallen to the lowest level in more than 4 years as April's consumer price index smashed expectations for the third straight month. Workers' real wages are up 1.9%, increasing each of the last 3 months. Encounters with gotaways, the top threat to public safety, are down by 95%. In March of 2025, fentanyl traffic at the southern border fell by 54% compared to March of 2024.
Because
Lastly,
people don't
Americans
use it
in this
anymore,
government-
you
in this
ignorant.
government cannot afford to ignore the specific pro-growth provisions that President Trump campaigned on. Our bill delivers on the specific acute policies American workers embraced. We end taxes on tips. We end taxes on overtime. We boost tax deductions
And taxes
for
on
seniors.
billionaires.
We expand family-centered tax incentives like the child tax credit, the standard deduction, and family leave. The One Big Beautiful Bill is our answer to the American people's mandate from November. It is a clear, full-throated response to the millions of hardworking men and women across the entire nation who demand a serious course correction from the last 4 years and the setting of our fiscal situation on a sustainable footing. The committees within the House have all completed their respective parts, and all the pieces have come together. I commend all the committees, chairmen, members, and staff who worked for months, often well into the night and early hours of the morning, to craft the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. We're here to finish the job and ship this legislation to the House floor. With that, I look forward to the discussion. I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any comments he wishes to make.
Who the
Well, that's a lot to
bloody hell is
digest.
that?
Thank you. Madam Chair, before we get into the substance here, I've got a simple question. What the hell are Republicans so afraid of? What the hell are you so scared of that you guys are holding this hearing at 1 o'clock in the morning? It's a simple question that speaks to the heart of what's going on here, and one that I'm going to keep on asking. If Republicans are so proud of what is in this bill, then why are you trying to ram it through in the dead of night? If you guys are so proud to kick 14 million people off Medicaid, if you guys are so proud to rip food assistance out of the refrigerators of moms and dads and their kids, if you guys are so proud of shutting down rural hospitals and hurting our farmers, if you guys really think these are such great, awesome, beautiful things to do, like Trump keeps saying, then why not hold this hearing at 1 p.m. and not 1 a.m.? Why not debate this bill in prime time when most of the American people can watch? It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I think it's prime time in Guam. And I think it's crystal clear. It's crystal clear to everyone what this is all about. Now, the chairwoman wants to pretend like meeting at 1 o'clock in the morning is business as usual around here. It is not. This is not normal at all. She had to go back 20 years into the archives to dig up a single example of rules meeting at 1 a.m. And I guess, is that supposed to be some kind of gotcha? I'm actually glad she went back 2 decades to British, and you want to shove it through in the dead of night because Trump said, close your eyes and vote for it. You're using emergency procedures to jam this through Congress to meet an artificial deadline that you created yourselves because the billionaires just couldn't wait for their tax cut. It's astonishing, really. It takes my breath away. It's just over 100 days, and you guys have gone from promising to lower costs to ripping away people's health care. Now, of course, you don't want anyone to know what you're doing here. It's because you know that this bill betrays the people who voted for you. You have the most ineffective Congress in a century. You've passed almost no legislation into law. And this is how you want to roll out your big centerpiece legislation at 1 o'clock in the morning. This isn't just incompetence. It's much more nefarious than that. You are intentionally hiding what you are doing. What an insult to the people of this country. What disdain you guys must have for the people who voted for you. You know, people are so tired of getting screwed over by a system that doesn't work for them. America is fed up with this BS, and people want change. And I don't blame them. I'm fed up, too. They want us to make things better for regular people. And what your big, ugly bill does is the exact opposite. You guys and Trump are perpetuating the exact broken system that people hate. You're rigging things for the rich and powerful. More tax breaks for billionaires while regular people get screwed. More giveaways for those at the top while moms and dads struggle to get by. More loopholes into the tax code for Wall Street CEOs and bankers while working families fall further and further behind. That's the Republican agenda. That's what you guys think is big and beautiful. Greed, corruption, and tax breaks for billionaires. You want to steal from the wallets of working class people, steal from their ability to buy food and get health care, and then you have the nerve to claim that this bill is about cutting costs and reducing waste? Give me a break. This bill raises the debt limit by $4 trillion. $4 trillion with a T. Even your own members, budget hawks in the House and Senate, weren't happy with the latest version of this bill because they know it will blow up our deficit. And the true cost is likely trillions of dollars higher, a cost shouldered by the American taxpayer. So you want to cut taxes for the rich and pay for it by exploding the debt and stealing from the American people. Stealing from people with the least so you guys can give more to those with the most. And I just find that fundamentally wrong, fundamentally cruel, totally out of touch, and totally and fundamentally immoral. Now let me walk through what your bill does. You guys are so eager to sweep it under the rug. First, you are making the biggest cuts to Medicaid in American history. As a result of this bill, nearly 14 million Americans will lose their health care, and millions more will pay higher premiums, co-pays, and deductibles. That's just a fact. Hospitals will close, nursing homes will shut down, and people will die. And not a single one of the proposals in your bill is about making Medicaid work better. Not one. Your bill doesn't save Medicaid. Your bill destroys Medicaid. We can and we should make Medicaid work better. Absolutely. Instead, your bill creates more red tape, more hurdles, and kicks struggling people off their health insurance. Now, who asked for this garbage? I mean, more red tape? Oh, boy. When I talk to people back home, that's exactly what they want with their health care. More red tape. I mean, come on. And then, if that's not bad enough, you are making the biggest cut to food assistance in American history. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, at least 5 million Americans will lose food assistance under your plan. 5 million more hungry Americans because of this bill. And that's probably a lowball estimate, by the way. You're slashing benefits from children, from seniors living on fixed incomes, from veterans who served this country and now rely on food assistance just to get by. And why? And why? So that the top 0.1%, people making over $3.5 million a year, can pocket $314,000 a year in new tax giveaways. I mean, you are literally taking food off kids' plates to buy Elon Musk another yacht.
Literally.
I guess he's getting a good return on his campaign donations, but I just find this whole thing disgusting. And look, at the end of the day, this is simple. It is simple. It's about whose side you're on. You guys wrote this bill for the top 0.1%. You wrote it for the billion-dollar corporations who offshore jobs and dodge taxes. You wrote it for the big oil and big pharma CEOs who rip people off. You wrote it for the rich and famous, for the people who never, ever have to worry about where their next meal is coming from or how to take care of their elderly parents. So you guys picked a side, okay? You picked the billionaires. I get it. You want to betray the people who voted for you. You want to sell them out because Trump told you to. But guess what? Democrats are picking a side too. And we are siding with the vast, vast, vast majority of Americans who you are going to screw over with this bill. We are siding with the 14 million parents and grandparents who are going to get kicked off health care if this monstrosity passes. We're siding with struggling families who are already having a hard time buying groceries, and the farmers whose incomes will drop because you're gutting the nutrition programs that create demand for the food that they grow, and the rural grocery stores that they support, and the nurses who will lose their jobs when you start closing down rural hospitals. That's who we're siding with, and that's who we choose to fight for. Now, I've seen a lot in my time in Congress. I've seen my fair share of bad bills, but this...
Hi, Andrew.
Hello?
Uh-uh.
Hello?
Yeah. Sorry.
Hello?
Yeah, we're here.
No, it's just went quiet.
It just, yeah, I agree, Andrew. Oh, video file cannot be played.
Sorry, who was
in
that?
housing,
Sorry, guys.
in
We're using
childcare,
C-SPAN's.
in clean energy, in community health. You
How's
could
it
have
going?
closed tax
Oh, well.
loopholes and make sure that billionaires pay what they owe.
Dems are
Instead, you
calling
chose to side with
Republicans out,
those
but
at the top.
Republicans
You
don't
chose
give a
to line the pockets of your rich donors, and the health and security of regular people be damned. This is not a governing philosophy. It is a scam. It is a scam. A scam. And I wasn't sent here to vote for trash like this. For the life of me, I cannot understand why you were doing this. Why the hell did you choose a career of public service just to do this? Just to rip away the health care and food assistance and security of working and middle-class Americans? Is that really what you came here to do? I don't understand this. I don't understand the cruelty. And let me say this to every Republican member who votes for this. You own it. You own it. You own every hospital that closes, every child that goes to bed hungry, every senior who loses care, and every American family forced to choose between groceries and rent, between their heating bill and their child care, between their kid's birthday party and their parents' long-term care. So you guys can force us to debate this bill in the dead of night. You can do it while the country sleeps. But the American people will wake up tomorrow morning, and I guarantee you they will wake up to how terrible your agenda is. They will remember this moment. They will remember who stood with the billionaires and who stood with them. We will make sure they remember, and I'll be damned if we let this pass quietly. I'm going to fight like hell, and I know I won't be alone. This is a farce, an outrageous insult to the people of this country to bring up a 1,000-page bill at 1 o'clock in the morning, a bill that's still being written, by the way, by Republicans as we speak, in a back room somewhere, for God's sake. And then to try to jam it through Congress in the middle of the night when nobody is watching is just unbelievably cynical. This is why people hate Washington. So if you guys think this ugly bill is so damn beautiful, like Trump keeps saying, you should have the courage to debate it in prime time. Madam Chair, we should reconvene at a reasonable hour and debate your bill in full view of the American people, not in the middle of the night like cowards. And for that reason, I move that the Rules Committee do now adjourn.
The gentleman,
Hi.
Is that her
the
carer?
question is on the motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
As for a roll call, Madam Chair.
The gentleman has asked for a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
My mic is a little bit low. How's that? Is that better? Overcooked?
Ms. Fishbach?
Thank you.
No. Ms. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman?
No.
Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy?
No.
Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin?
No.
Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy?
No.
Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott?
No.
Thank you.
Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse?
Aye.
Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Lega-Fernandez?
Aye.
Ms. Lega-Fernandez, aye. Mr. Griffith?
No.
Mr. Griffith, no. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will report the tally.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The noes have
Right.
it. We will move on.
So fuck you, America.
Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I now welcome our first panel, Chairman Rogers and Representative Smith from the Committee on Armed Services, Chairman Arrington
Yeah, exactly, JT.
and Representative Boyle from the Committee on the Budget, Chairman Hill and Representative Waters from the Committee on Financial Services, and Chairman Comer and Representative Lynch. There he is. Chairman Lynch from the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Your full statements will be submitted for the record, and we ask that you summarize your statements in 5 minutes. Chairman Rogers, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern. I appreciate the opportunity to present the Armed Services Committee Reconciliation title. The HAS title provides $150 billion in mandatory funding to modernize our military, revitalize the defense industrial base, and improve quality of life for our service members. The time for this level of investment is long overdue. The threats we face from China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and others are much more complex and challenging than at any point in our history. We are being outpaced by our adversaries in the development and deployment of critical capabilities. Our defense industrial base is atrophied to the point where we may no longer be able to sustain
Fox?
prolonged conflict, and it all stems from a chronic underinvestment in our national security. Defense spending is not keeping up with inflation. In fact, we are currently at the lowest level of defense spending as a percentage of GDP since before World War II. That anemic level of investment is endangering our national security, and it must change. Reconciliation gives us the opportunity to do just that. It forces the department to start building the future of American defense now. It invests billions to accelerate deployment of new, low-cost, attritable autonomous systems. These unmanned air, surface, and underwater systems are the key to victory on future battlefields. The HAS title will go a long way toward restoring American deterrence and building our ready, capable, and lethal fighting force that President Trump has promised. Finally, I'm very pleased to be able to report that the committee reported this out on a bipartisan basis. I think that demonstrates the underlying bipartisan consensus we have to increase investment in our national security. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and for your help in moving this critical bill forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really just have 2 points. I mean, certainly I agree with the chairman of the Armed Services Committee that we face a very complex threat environment and a need to modernize our military in a bunch of different directions. I'm not sure I agree on what the total number of the budget should be for the House Armed Services Committee, but 2 crucial points. If you believe that the Defense Department needs more money, that we need to spend more money on defense, you cannot vote for this reconciliation bill. This reconciliation bill is going to
Number
cut
120
taxes
this
over
time,
10 years by
Mr.
somewhere between $5 and $7 trillion, depending on, you know, how you guys all finally decide what you're going to put in there and what you're not going to put in there. It is going to increase the debt and the deficit by $3.5 trillion or thereabouts. So whatever we cram into this bill, whatever $150 billion I guess they're going to try to throw at defense, will be irrelevant a year or two or 3 or 4 years from now, because our $35 trillion debt will continue to grow. Our $1.8 trillion yearly deficit will continue to grow. You won't have money to make an investment in anything, not even defense. So we are not going to see an increase in defense spending over the long haul because we are giving away all of the money. If, in fact, you believe that defense is that important, then you ought to be willing to pay for it. We simply cannot continue to borrow money forever. So it's not going to help defense. If you are a defense hawk, you cannot vote for this reconciliation bill, which leads into the second point. I have heard for a very long time from my Republican colleagues that the reason they have to pass their budget is because of the existential threat that the debt and the deficit pose for our nation. I wish I could replay all of the incredibly passionate speeches that I've heard on the floor and elsewhere from my Republican colleagues about how terrible this is. And that's what the reconciliation bill was going to do. And I can picture all of your constituents who you made these promises to, and then you get back here and you put this reconciliation bill up there and they say, well, how'd we do? You know, how'd we do on getting the debt down? Well, you know, it's difficult, it's complicated, but we actually added $3 trillion to it. So the budget hawks in the Republican conference, I mean, are you going to stand up tomorrow and say we were lying to you?
Random.
You know, we never really meant it? I mean, it's just
Kushner's dad was
ridiculous
apparently a
that you
big
would
donor.
consider passing a reconciliation bill that's going to add $3 trillion to the debt after, you know, my gosh, the speeches I heard would have made you think that
agree,
not
yeah.
getting the debt under
Filibuster for
control was
25
going
hours
to kill
only
us
to
all
piss
in like
it
a
away
year.
for another fucking.
So this reconciliation bill is an utter disaster for the country for a lot of the reasons. I associate myself with many of the remarks that Mr. McGovern made on all the things that are being cut. But if you care about defense and you care about the debt, how in the hell can you vote for this? I mean, I look forward to someone making that argument at some point. So I hope that the Republicans who care about the debt and care about defense will vote this bill down. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Chairman Hill, you're recognized.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Ranking Member McGovern. I've never considered myself much of a morning person, and this takes it to a whole new level. A few weeks ago, the House Financial Services Committee completed work on the assignment to us on the budget resolution from Congress adopted early in April. The resolution asked us to decrease the deficit by at least $1 billion over the 2025 to 2034 period. We've done that. We've rescinded the remaining unobligated balances with the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Green and Resilient Retrofit Program created under the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. We ended the Public Accounting Oversight Board's authority to collect regulatory fees and transferred any unused balances to the Treasury. Audit oversight will continue without disruption.
I'm live on YouTube right now.
We put a firm cap on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's budget, setting its funding at no more than $249 million for fiscal 2025, with an annual adjustment for inflation going forward. For the CFPB Civil Penalty Fund, once direct victims are compensated, remaining funds will be transferred to the Treasury's general fund. Finally, we capped the assessment collected by the Office of Financial Research at the Treasury, aligning them with the average annual expenses of the Financial Stability Oversight Council over the past 3 years. Any surplus will, once again, be returned to the Treasury. I'm pleased to report that the Financial Services Committee exceeded our instruction by the Budget Committee and that the CBO estimates the deficit will decrease by $5.2 billion from the efforts of our committee. During our markup, we spent over 9 hours debating our portion of this reconciliation bill. We considered all 40 amendments that our Democratic colleagues offered and did not limit the minority's ability to propose modifications to the underlying legislative text. After this long, comprehensive process, we favorably transmitted our committee print to fulfill our obligations to the reconciliation bill before rules today. I want to thank all my colleagues. I want to remind all my colleagues to recall why we are here. The American people voted for fiscal responsibility. They voted for change. Our country is currently $37 trillion in debt, paying billions of dollars in interest each day on that debt. This year alone, we'll spend almost $1 trillion on total interest. If Congress fails to get our fiscal house in order, our debt will continue to grow exponentially, and our grandchildren will pay the consequences. For too long, government spending has been on a one-way ratchet up. So we're here today to finally do the difficult work of extricating our nation from this fiscal predicament. Financial Services Committee portion of the concurrent resolution does more than its part to reduce the deficit. I'm eager to finish our work and finally tackle these issues. I ask the committee for your support in advancing this bill to the House floor. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Representative Waters, you're recognized.
Drag us here in the dead of the night, under the guise of having a productive hearing about. Well, I can't let that not be heard. Well, here we are. Republicans have dragged us here in the dead of the night, under the guise of having a productive hearing about the GOP tax scam bill. But the truth is that Republicans couldn't care less about how bad this bill is. They're going to sit here and ignore every single thing that I and my Democratic colleagues have to say about this bill and how it will harm hard-working American families. And it's all because they are afraid of Donald Trump. They're so afraid of Donald Trump that they will gladly allow the American people to serve as collateral damage to the $5 trillion handout, $5 trillion handout to billionaires in this bill. They're so afraid of Donald Trump that they're okay with him getting richer while their constituents are getting poor. This isn't hyperbole. This is real life. This bill cuts programs that will literally make American families poor and make Donald Trump and his billionaire donors richer. I was there at the Consumer Financial Protection
They're
Bureau
literally trying to use
after
like
Trump
new
and
math.
Elon Musk illegally attempted to shut down the Bureau.
Where they're
I heard from
pretending-
consumers
they're
about
like,
what
if it's
shutting down
already,
the
if it's money
agency
that we're already
means for
spending
them.
now,
This is
and we
the
make it permanent, then it counts as zero money. That's literally what Republicans are trying to do, trying to pass it so that certain spending is permanent, therefore never has to be legislated again, therefore they don't have to count it.
very same agency that
fucking
following the 2008
Literally everyone's like, that's
financial
not how
crisis,
math
which many of us in this room remember, was created to stop predatory financial institutions from ripping off our constituents. The same agency that has saved American families $21 billion by returning
This is
to
live.
them funds that were
Yes,
swindled
ish.
out of them. Trump failed to shut the agency down in court. So now they're trying to soliciting the help of Republicans.
This is the House rules
This
debate,
bill,
though.
this budget
I think
scheme will
pretty-
slash the
I don't know.
Bureau's budget by
I should know
70%.
this, but like,
And put the agency's crucial work,
I'm pretty sure
like
they
cracking
just
down
vote
on
to
illegal
advance
junk
it.
fees, tackling discrimination
deciding
in housing,
what
and protecting
the
service
circumstances
members
are
and students
for it
from
to
scams
pass,
to a
basically,
grinding
technically.
halt. This is all to cut taxes for billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. Republicans are also pushing to gut the Financial Stability Oversight Council and Treasury's Office of Financial Research, agencies that are designed to prevent another financial crisis like the one in 2008. They're eliminating funding for affordable housing construction despite a national homelessness crisis. I also showed up at HUD because I know the harm this will pose to families. They're also so desperate to do Trump's bidding that they're eliminating another agency that doesn't cost taxpayers anything. The Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, which oversees auditors to prevent frauds like Enron and ensure that companies controlled by the Chinese Communist Party are on the up. What's even more sinister about Republicans dismantling our financial institutions, that they're doing this in the middle of an economic crisis. Our economy is falling behind Europe, China, and Canada. Americans are so economically anxious that they're holding off on starting a family and buying a home. The so-called pro-family party is making it harder for Americans to have kids and ripping away the American dream of home ownership. Inflation is rising, the dollar is down, yields are up, and borrowing is getting more expensive. And just this past Friday, Moody's lowered the United States credit rating because of Trump's reckless tariff policies and growing concerns about how this bill would jack up our debt by giving a massive, unnecessary handout to billionaires. Don't forget, he's all carrying out the most egregious crypto scheme in history, a scam that is enriching himself and his family while average investors lose money. But nothing in the bill addresses this crisis. Trump has thrown the U.S. economy. He's put us in this position. Republicans, let's face it, you're not serious about helping your constituents. You only care about kissing up to King Trump. This isn't what the American people elected us for. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Waters. Mr. Arrington, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the Rules Committee. Only in the mind of a Democrat could a 22% tax hike prevention be a bill that's characterized as trash. Only in the mind of a Democrat could giving our soldiers, our sons and daughters in uniform, what they need to be ready to protect us, to keep us safe and free, be a scam. Only in the mind of a Democrat would keeping illegal immigrants from receiving taxpayer-funded social services so that we could sustain those programs for American citizens now and into the future could be a scam or trash. And I got a whole lot of other talking points, and I look forward to the conversation. The reconciliation bill under consideration today is the principal legislative vehicle for advancing the full America First agenda to realize President Trump's vision and House Republicans' unwavering commitment to making America safe and prosperous again. Our goals were as follows: to strengthen our military and secure our border, to reignite economic growth and unleash American prosperity, and to rein in wasteful Washington spending and begin the process of restoring the fiscal health of our great nation. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act contains the largest tax cuts, security investment, federal energy asset deployment, and spending reduction in the history of the United States of America. This is an historic moment. We believe it's a generational opportunity to reclaim the American promise, to renew the American spirit, and restore America's greatness. The American people gave President Trump a mandate and unified Republican leadership in Congress to reverse course on the failed policies of the last 4 years. Their message to Washington, Madam Chair, I believe was crystal clear. They want competent leaders, common sense policies, and a commitment from everybody in this room, all of the lawmakers and leaders of our great country, to be committed to putting America and Americans first. Let's give the voters what they got, what they asked for today. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Arrington. Mr. Boyle, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you to all the members who go above and beyond by serving on the Rules Committee. When I was a teen, my late mother would often say, "Nothing good happens after midnight." Now I know what she meant. big bill for billionaires will truly hurt working Americans. Let me highlight some of the major points.
But that could be easily
First,
recognized as
it will
the
bring
problem.
about, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the greatest loss of health care coverage in American history. It does it in several ways. First, by providing and instituting the biggest cut to Medicaid in American history. Second, by launching devastating cuts to Obamacare. Those two combined will result in a loss of health care for about 14 million Americans. But that's not all. Just tonight, a few hours ago, the bombshell came out. The nonpartisan CBO's official numbers show this bill will bring about an over $500 billion cut to Medicare, one of the largest cuts to Medicare since the program was created in 1965. So the largest cut to Medicaid in American history,
Yeah,
devastating cuts to the Affordable Care Act, and one of the largest cuts to Medicare in American history. And why? To help subsidize tax cuts that mostly go to the top 1%. And of course, those cuts I highlighted to healthcare aren't the only cuts that are in here. We also have included the largest cuts to nutrition assistance and food programs in American history, cuts to all sorts of education programs, and the list goes on and on and on. And does that, in the end, mean most working Americans will be better off? No.
Nope.
Because also out from CBO just tonight are the distributional effects of this bill. It's in its entirety. And what does it show? The bottom 10% of Americans will actually be poorer as a result of this bill, with the biggest benefit going to the top 1% of Americans. What is also quite clear is that this bill is not entirely paid for. Even after all of those cuts to Medicaid, all of those cuts to Medicare, all of those cuts to the Affordable Care Act and nutrition assistance and on, they don't come close to paying for the cost of the tax cuts. So how is the rest paid for? It isn't. Just tacking on more and more to our national debt. No wonder just on Friday evening, Moody's delivered the third credit downgrade this nation has ever received. This is truly, I think all sides will agree with this, a significant piece of legislation. Frankly, I think one of the most consequential in our lifetimes. Sadly, though, I believe the consequences for my constituents and most working Americans will be absolutely devastating. I urge you to reject it. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle. Chairman Comer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Dr. Fox and Ranking Member McGovern. Today, I'm here to talk about a generational opportunity to realize reforms that address the budget deficit.
Yeah.
The provisions proposed by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform in Title IX of this bill are part of President Trump's larger effort to improve the fiscal health of the federal government. Last November, Democrats offered to provide more of the same, but the American people instead elected President Trump to a historic second term on promises to change Washington, D.C. The deficit reductions in Title IX of the Reconciliation Package codify part of the President's vision for enacting his agenda and achieving significant taxpayer savings. Congressional procedure, precedent, and tradition too often contribute to an ever-expanding federal government. Meanwhile, too little is done to shrink the administrative state and make the federal bureaucracy more efficient. The budget reconciliation process provides a rare opportunity to reverse that trajectory. Fundamentally, Congress instructed the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform to advance policies that reduce the federal deficit by at least $50 billion.
Yes.
Despite our committee's limited jurisdiction over mandatory spending programs, we passed a package of budget reforms that save a significant sum. We are in a fiscal crisis. The reforms we moved out of the Oversight Committee met the moment in terms of addressing that fiscal crisis. We did the job we needed to do on behalf of the American taxpayers and future generations. The simple truth is that federal employee retirement benefits significantly outpace those of the private sector. To this point, the Congressional Budget Office issued an April 2024 report that I requested, stating that, quote, benefits for federal workers cost 43% more per hour worked on average than benefits for private sector workers, end quote. CBO stated further that, quote, benefits also constituted a larger share of total compensation for federal workers than for workers in the private sector, end quote. Most of the costs associated with these benefits are funded by hardworking taxpayers in the private sector and federal borrowing. I understand that our conference includes members that represent different constituencies. I support leadership's work to combine our package with the provisions reported by other committees into one bill that can gain the support of our conference. And I thank my colleagues for working with leadership to represent their constituents and reach an agreement on a package that advances significant budget-saving reforms. I fully support our collective efforts to advance a package that works for the House and supports President Trump's agenda. Title IX of the legislation before us today advances most of the Oversight Committee's important budgetary reforms. These reforms will save taxpayers money while protecting current retirees, as well as law enforcement officers, border patrol officers, air traffic controllers, nuclear material couriers, and firefighters who serve a clear public interest and typically have shortened federal careers due to mandatory retirement rules and early retirement incentives. Taken together, the reforms now being considered in Title IX will reduce the deficit and move us toward the more accountable federal government and the American people demand and deserve. I ask the Rules Committee to promptly advance this legislation for consideration by the House, and I welcome the committee's questions. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. Representative Lynch, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's going on 2 a.m. because the Trump administration and congressional Republicans want to unload the cost of $7 trillion in tax cuts onto the backs of American workers, families, and dedicated public servants. And because this bill is so disgraceful, it can't stand the light of day. In just over 100 days, we've witnessed the Trump administration lay off more than 200,000 probationary federal employees, including leading researchers, public health experts, veterans, and other critical positions. Trump has coerced 75,000 civil servants into resigning. Trump has replaced 50,000 nonpartisan civil servants with political appointees. And Trump has illegally terminated nonpartisan independent inspectors general and federal watchdogs. This partisan bill threatens to further undermine the federal workforce by reducing the take-home pay, benefits, and workforce protections of 2.4 million federal employees, most of whom are middle-class American workers, and a third of whom are military veterans. This is more of the same, an unprecedented assault and political purge of the nonpartisan civil service. And the people who pay most for these attacks are the veterans, children, seniors, and other Americans who rely on our federal workers to deliver those life-saving services. The federal employee retirement system, annuity supplement, a monthly bridge payment for retirees before they're eligible for Social Security at age 62 would be eliminated for anyone not actively receiving the supplemental payment by January 1st, 2028. Or who does not meet a specific exemption. Federal workers like letter carriers, VA hospital nurses, food inspectors who have committed decades to the job are eligible to retire would not be able to receive this vital payment to make ends meet. That's $18,000 per year in retirement income for the average beneficiary eliminated because billionaires need another tax break. This legislation would also retroactively change the annuity formula to base most employees' annual retirement payments on their highest 5 years of earnings instead of the highest 3 as they were promised when they were hired. This is an outright theft of earned benefits that would cost federal retirees thousands of dollars annually. And my Republican colleague, Representative Mike Turner of Ohio, was exactly right to speak out and vote against this provision during our committee's consideration of this bill, making the rejection of the oversight provisions bipartisan. Another particularly egregious provision of this bill would force any newly hired federal employee to accept at-will employment or lose 5% of their take-home pay to increase retirement contributions. Federal workers who choose to remain under the merit-based system would be forced to contribute nearly 10% of their paycheck towards retirement. CBO estimates that 75% of new hires in the federal government would now become at-will employees subject to political purges of the federal workforce with little to no protections. I'll be introducing amendments to strike this bill's at-will employment provisions and to exempt veterans and federal workers who entered the workforce prior to the bill enactment from the changes in the annuity formula. Despite the claims of this administration, federal workers are not leeches on the system, but hardworking, dedicated public servants who are paid about 25% less than their private sector counterparts. A strong, nonpartisan federal workforce is fundamental to a functioning democratic government. These dedicated workers deserve our respect and our support. Like most Americans, federal workers faced increased costs for groceries and housing and economic uncertainty because of President Trump's reckless tax and tariff agenda. The Trump tariffs are estimated to cost American households $4,900 per year, the largest tax increase since 1968. President Trump and congressional Republicans are also advocating for a tax regime that will actually increase federal deficits by more than $4 trillion over the next 10 years. And worst of all, they're seeking to offset their tax cuts for billionaires by gutting $800 billion from Medicaid programs. My Democratic colleagues and I strongly oppose that motion. Oversight Democrats stand with struggling families. We oppose corruption and abuse of power, and we are committed to solving our nation's crises without sacrificing the well-being of our civil servants. I urge my colleagues to reject this reverse Robin Hood legislation, which robs from the poor to give to the rich, and instead work towards a budget that respects American workers and the basic needs and services they provide. I welcome the committee's questions, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Chairman Arrington, we keep hearing a constant refrain from the Democrats that the tax cuts were driven to the wealthy. The Washington Post fact-checked what they referred to as Democrats', quote, zombie claim, end quote, that 83% of the benefits from Republican tax reform in 2017 went to the wealthiest 1%. They fact-checked this multiple times. The Post gave the claim 3 Pinocchios, saying, quote, the tax bill has been in place for more than 3 years, and it's clear from the available data that the top 1% did not end up with most of the tax benefits. Do you agree with me that the Democrats have a credibility problem when they discuss President Trump's tax cuts?
They have a major credibility problem because the facts are contrary to their mischaracterization. The top 1% actually pay a higher share of their taxes than they did prior to TCJA. So in that respect, it became a more progressive tax code. But every other income level saw a tax break. In addition to that, we had record wage increases. In fact, the bottom 10% of wage earners grew their wages at twice the top 10%. And it's 3 times the income increase of the bottom 50% relative to the top 1%. So I would just add that it couldn't be a scam on working people and poor people when we achieved the lowest poverty rate in recorded history. So people got better opportunities and bigger paychecks.
When?
And the people at the lower income spectrum got the biggest benefit from TCJA. So
what the fuck is he talking about?
Mischaracterization may be an understatement for how they describe tax cuts for the rich. And let's remember, the top 10% of income earners are paying 70% of our salary, the lights, and the entire freight of the federal government. So when we talk about tax fairness and equity, they have an interesting perspective on that.
God,
Thank
Jesus
you.
Christ.
I think the word mischaracterization of what they're saying is a kind way to say
I
it.
hate this woman. I don't know what the fuck
Who
is
is
wrong
this
with her.
person?
She
Looks
is
like one of the Golden
There's
Girls.
a three-letter word
no,
that
do
characterizes it
not
better, but we'll leave that
disrespect the
alone.
Golden Girls like that.
No, I'm not
President
doing.
Biden
I'm not doing, but she's got
This
that vibe.
this
to her.
woman looks like she got
went to the
fucking
top
she
1%.
expired
And not
already
ordinary
and
people.
someone
Didn't
dug her up, warmed her up in the
factcheck.org
microwave
have to
one
debunk
too
him?
many times,
And
tried
didn't the
three too many times.
liberal
Aren't
Then
chairs
fucking
supposed to be
spit her out
bipartisan?
into this committee
even
hearing.
have to correct
Who the fuck is
Aren't chairs
she?
supposed to be bipartisan?
And didn't
She's just
even the
grandstanding
New York
now.
Times
Yeah.
state
Well, she's not.
that,
No, she doesn't have to be
quote, studies
bipartisan.
consistently find that the
Weekend of Bernadette.
2017 law cut taxes for most Americans.
Not my Betty White.
And doesn't this constant refrain we're hearing from Democrats now match exactly what has been categorically
She can't even
debunked?
fucking speak. Someone needs to.
Yes,
fucking-
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Someone needs to sneeze on
And
that woman.
nobody knows that better than
Somebody needs an English lesson.
average
But that'll do her in.
family of four who saw
They can't afford me.
about a $5,000 increase in their take-home pay because of their tax relief, which was almost the opposite effect of the inflation tax they paid over the last 3 or 4 years.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern.
I think what you're talking about is not what we're talking about here today. We're talking about the Republican reconciliation package that is going to be jammed through this committee and rushed to the floor. And if I am understanding the numbers correctly, the latest version of their tax scam, the top 0.1% stand to gain $255,000 on average in 2027 alone. That's $700 a day, every day. The people who make over $1 million a year will also get their pockets lined. On average, these millionaires will have an additional $81,500 per year, but pennies for everybody else. For those earning less than $50,000 per year, the average benefit is $265. That's less than $1 per day. And that's laughable when you begin to look at the gaps that are going to be created by these cuts in other programs. But, Mr. Boyle, I have a letter here that you received along with the Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, from the director of the Congressional Budget Office. And I'm looking at this chart here about who benefits from this bill. It doesn't seem to match what Chairwoman Fox and Mr. Arrington are just talking about right now. You want to comment on this?
What that chart shows, and by the way, that's not my chart.
Yeah, I know.
That's not your chart.
CBO's.
That is the official scorekeeper's chart, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. And if you can show that chart again, what it shows is the poor get poorer while the rich get richer. And so let me quote again from the CBO, specifically their numbers. For people in the bottom 10%, they will experience a 4% loss of household wealth. Meanwhile, for people in the top 10%, they will see their household resources increase by 2%. It is as simple as that.
And I ask unanimous consent that this be entered into the record, Madam Chair.
Without objection.
My view on legislation is that if you believe in the legislation, you ought to vote for it. If you don't believe in it, you ought to vote against it. So I would say to my friend Chairman Arrington, if you believe the stuff that's contained in this reconciliation bill, if you think these priorities are the right priorities, and if these represent your values, then by all means vote for it. I'll disagree with you. I mean, I could spend all day here because I'm also on the Agriculture Committee, and we had a lengthy hearing on the impact of the nutrition cuts on average people and on states too. There's an unfunded mandate here as well, and it's going to be significant. But if this bill represents your values, I'll just say for the record, it doesn't represent my values. And so, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. But, let me ask you a question, though, Chairman Arrington. I mean, this is the Rules Committee print of what we're talking about. Is this Rules Committee print in front of us, is this the final version of the bill, or a change is going to be made?
Sir, it's the final version of the bill until the manager's amendment is
changes
completed,
will-
and
so
then
the
and then
changes
we'll
will
know
be
what
made.
those
Okay.
definitive changes are.
So are negotiations still ongoing? And if so, with whom? Where are they, and in what room? Shouldn't you be in that room instead of being here right now because you're the budget chair? I mean, during the markup, during the budget markup on Sunday night, you said that you weren't aware of any changes being made, and then my colleague on the Rules Committee, Mr. Norman, on this committee, followed up saying he was happy with the direction, with the changes that were being made. So which is it? So changes are going to be made.
Well, I'd say there have been a lot of conversations and discussion and healthy debate within the conference. But as far as I'm concerned, my job was first to make sure that the budget targets were achieved, and they were. So we had a balanced budget reconciliation bill. That was our job to affirm that in the Budget Committee. As to what changes, I don't know of any definitive changes until I see it on paper. Lots of things change, as you know,
Right, yeah,
in this process.
But in the Budget Committee markup, you said that we would have an official score from the nonpartisan budget experts at CBO before we vote on this bill. And when will we get that score?
I believe we will still have a score on the final bill.
So you think we'll get the score before we vote on it?
That's my expectation.
And if we don't, would you recommend that we hold off until we get the
I think we got a lot of the bill scored at this point. My expectation is that they'll have the bill scored.
Yeah, but the changes, yeah, I mean, one of the things about CBO is it talks not only just about the impacts on the deficit and the debt, but also on like how many people will lose health care benefits, or, and other benefits. So any change will impact our constituents differently. And so I guess I just want to, I mean, do you think it's okay for us to vote on this bill without knowing how much it will cost the American taxpayer, or how many people will get kicked off of their health care? And, I mean, if you're saying we should absolutely have a final CBO score before we vote on this, I could live with that. I'm just.
To help fewer
I just
people.
don't, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're committing to or not committing to.
I'm committing, my expectation is they'll have all the scores, Mr. McGovern, but I think they know the various machinations and what that will do to ensure a certain number of people who receive, for example, Medicaid, who are in this country illegally under the policies of President Biden.
That's not happening.
And what that will change when we put prohibitions against taxpayer
Shut
funding,
the fuck up,
funded
dude. That's
services
not
going to
happening.
I'm not looking for a prediction.
If you're
I'm looking for
undocumented, how do you
certainty
get
about
benefits?
sure.
You don't.
Mr. Boyle, as you
That's
know,
the
statutory
fucking thing.
pay-go,
You don't.
which stands for pay-as-you-go.
If you haven't got
is a law that
documentation,
requires
you
tax
can't
cuts and
receive
spending
federal aid,
increases
surely.
To be offset, meaning that they do not add to the deficit. If at the end of the year, congressional legislation collectively violates pay-go, those deficit effects trigger across-the-board cuts to programs like Medicare. Does this bill trigger statutory pay-go?
Yes, and it's not me saying it. It is the Congressional Budget Office confirming it as of a couple hours ago. And look, this is really the breaking news, because when the Budget Committee kicked off this process approximately 3 months ago, there was a commitment by President Trump that there would be no Medicare cuts in this piece of legislation. And indeed, over the last several months, there's been no discussion of Medicare at all. There has been of Medicaid, but not of Medicare. Well, here we are tonight because, as you explained, because of the size of the deficits, because of the pay-go or pay-as-you-go act, that would trigger sequestration of Medicare, and it would total over $500 billion. The official figure that CBO confirms is $535 billion in cuts to Medicare.
And this bill doesn't waive statutory pay-go.
No, it does not.
So this will have a direct impact on Medicare and the federal budget, which is, again, I think a lot of people who are not following this as closely as you are probably are not aware of, and will be surprised to learn about tomorrow. Chairman Hill, as you know, military service members and veterans are disproportionately targeted and endangered by financial fraudsters. And the CFPB, whose funding Republicans are aiming to cut by roughly 70%, received nearly 85,000 financial complaints from service members and veterans in 2023. And the CFPB has provided $363 million in monetary relief from enforcement actions that involve harm to service members and veterans. Our colleague from Connecticut, Mr. Himes, spoke on an amendment in your committee that would prevent funding cuts to the CFPB from harming veterans and service members. I mean, this seems like a common sense amendment to me, yet not a single Republican spoke in favor of it. No one on your side even spoke up to explain why they were in favor of not moving this amendment forward, which again, I think threatens the financial safety of our service members and our veterans. So at the end of the day, I mean, this amendment was voted down. So I just want to give you an opportunity to explain why cutting an agency that protects the financial well-being of our service members and our veterans is a priority in this bill. I don't.
Please explain it.
Understand it.
Well, thank you, Mr. McGovern. The plan
it.
that Republicans advanced in this reconciliation plan was to save mandatory spending, and it's our judgment, going back and looking at the history of the CFPB since its inception in the Dodd-Frank Act, that it could continue its core function and meet its statutory obligations at a 5% cap of the Federal Reserve's budget, which would be about $249 million this year, and that it could meet all of its statutory obligations in meeting what Dodd-Frank directed them to do, which is for large financial institutions and non-banking companies comply with consumer compliance, and we believe they can do that.
Yeah, I'm hearing great concern about the impacts of these cuts, and what I worry about in a number of areas with regard to this bill is that cuts are being made not necessarily on the merits, but just because cuts have to be made. Ranking Member Waters, the CFPB has returned $21 billion to consumers over the last 14 years. If Congress proceeds to slash 70% of the CFPB's budget, a vital agency whose sole purpose is to protect American consumers in the financial marketplace, would the CFPB be still be able to fight for consumers and seek remediation when they are harmed with this kind of cut?
Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Davis. Absolutely not. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is extraordinarily important for consumers. I sat on the conference committee of the Dodd-Frank reforms when we created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. A lot of work had been done by Senator Warren and others. But I want you to know, prior to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the consumers really had nowhere to turn. They had nowhere to really lodge their complaints. And this is very important because now, with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the excellent work that has been done, they've been able to return $21 billion over 14 years to our consumers. I want you to know that our consumers, the victims, are mostly the least of these. These are people in poor communities, and not only in inner city, but in rural communities. They are the victims of everybody with a kind of a broad scheme that see them as vulnerable and target them. I want you to know, without the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we would not have been able to deal with the big fines that we had to do some of the largest banks in this country that were literally, in many ways, had less risk management that they should have, and all kind of errors and mistakes that fraud was taking place. And so this proposed cut of 70% literally would kill the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And I want you to know that even, and I'm recalling, when Mick Mulvaney was acting director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, he basically said, I'm bound to execute the law as written. When he first went in, he did not request any money. And then in one quarter, he and I think one other, Kathy Cramager, when she was there, requested almost the maximum amount in one quarter of $249 million. So this is extraordinarily important. All of us, Democrats and Republicans alike, should care about our consumers, about our voters, about the fact that they need the money that they earn. Hard-working people
like,
to
how
put
the
food
fuck can
on the
you
table,
defend
to pay the rent, getting ripped
cutting-
off in so many ways, and
Like,
nowhere to
literally,
turn.
how can you be-
would be absolutely disastrous.
How can a
Thank
fucking
you. The
Republican
oversight
voter
portion
like,
of this
defend
bill
this
would
and be
reduce
like,
pay,
yeah, no, I want them to get
pensions,
rid
and
of the
protections
fucking
for
organization
current
that like
and future federal
make sure
employees.
I don't get
The bill would
scammed.
force the federal workforce to foot the bill for tax cuts for billionaires, and comes as the Trump-Musk administration is carrying out a cruel, full-scale assault on the federal workforce. The American people and the life-saving services they rely upon will suffer the most as a result of Republicans' efforts to purge the federal government of its dedicated, high-performing public servants and politicize the delivery of basic needs and services to our veterans, our children, and our seniors. Republicans also want to extort future civil servants into giving up their protections which serve the interest of the American people who want good government workers, not completely subject to the whims of whoever occupies the White House. Representative Lynch,
Yeah, right.
what would the approximate financial impact of these provisions be on the average federal worker? You got to press your mic. Yeah.
If you add everything up, so the FERS annuity supplement would cost the average employee $54,000 in retirement income when they average it out over the 3 years that the average employee uses that for. Then the changing the high 3 to the high 5 costs them another $16,560 over 20 years. And then finally, the converting new employees at will, unless they accept, and plus the added money that they have to pay for their pension if they want to come under the Merit Service Protection Board, it brings everything to over $106,000 over a 20-year career.
Yeah, and
Mr. Ranking Member, I just want to add your previous question about service members.
Yeah.
This bill eliminates the Office of Service Member Affairs, which is the CFPB department that really watched after. If you go to any of these Army bases, you get onto Fort Hood, outside the bases are all these money services and you know, their short-term loans, things like that, payment systems that are exploiting these young service members and their families. That office that used to protect them is being eliminated in this bill.
And what would the effect on our nation's nonpartisan civil service be of effectively extorting new hires to become at-will employees? I mean, would we see the same level of nonpartisan excellence?
It would gut it. So the estimate is that 75% of our federal employees, remember, these are new people coming into the workforce, they would reject paying the extra money for their pension and instead become, they would become at-will employees. So because they have no pension at the end, they're probably going to be relying on, you know, public assistance instead of being allowed to build a pension for themselves during their working lives.
And Chairman Comer, is it correct that under this legislation, your pension contributions don't increase, but a newly hired VA nurse or Department of Defense education activity teacher who wants workplace protections from political purgers would pay 5% more of their salary towards their pension than they would under the current law?
Well, they would have a choice. They would have a choice.
The answer is yes, right?
They would have a choice to be an at-will employee and make more money, or be a traditional government employee, like what you all
There's something
prefer.
that to me is inherently wrong about all of this. I mean, we should want a federal civil service that represents the best of the best.
I disagree. I think that...
You may disagree with that. That's fine.
No, I don't disagree with that. I think it's okay to give people a choice.
Right.
Give federal employees a choice. They can make decisions. The government doesn't have to make every decision for everybody, including all the government employees.
Government employees can have a choice here.
Why not give them
Right,
both?
but the incentives here are backwards, that's the point I'm trying to make, is that I think there's an attempt by this administration, and you may agree with it, to basically politicize our federal workforce, to make everybody just say whatever the administration wants, and that's it. And I think this is about incentivizing that. But let me just say, my final, to Ranking Member Smith, from your time on the Armed Services Committee, it is clear that you understand the value of defense spending and investing in our military. Do you believe that an increase of $150 billion for defense over the $848 billion provided to the Department of Defense in fiscal year 2025, and with few guardrails, makes sense when the pay for is devastating cuts from essential programs for the American people like Medicaid, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is SNAP, and student loan and grant programs at the Department of Education?
I do not, and then that's why I voted against it in committee and opposed this. I mean, adding $150 billion to defense is debatable in and of itself, but where it's coming from, as I think a number of people have articulated, it's coming from all these other programs. It's also coming from just borrowing the money. And I will also say we do not yet have a national security plan from the Trump administration. We've heard that they want to cut 8% from certain aspects of it. We haven't seen what that is, so we don't know what the plan is for this $150 billion. It is spread out over 4 years, by the way, not all in the first year.
And let me just add my final point here. I mean, many have expressed concerns with how Secretary Hegseth has managed the Pentagon, prioritizing loyalty over competence, decimating the military and civilian workforce, and undermining the effectiveness of the Department of Defense. Given that chaos, is now an appropriate time to gift the Department of Defense an additional $150 billion on top of the $858 billion that they already received in FY 2025? I mean, do you have any concerns about this?
I do, and I don't believe so. And that was a central argument that House Democrats made during the markup. We have seen Secretary Hegseth struggling to run the department well. I think it's up to like 5 of his employees have quit or been fired in the first 3 or 4 months. They've had highly critical things to say about the way the department is being run. Obviously, they don't know how to control secure information securely. And again, they don't have a plan in terms of where they're planning to spend. We don't even have an FY26 full budget yet. So, no, I don't think this department can be trusted with that.
I want to thank all the panel for being here. Again, as I said before, this bill doesn't represent my values, and I'm going to be part of an effort to fight like hell to defeat this. This is bad for our country. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Chairman Rogers, I'm going to come to you in just a second to talk about the investments through DOD, but I just want to make sure my understanding of the current tax law is that the top tax bracket starts for married couples filing jointly at $731,200, and that rate is 37%. Is that correct, Mr. Arrington?
Yes, sir.
Now, in our piece of legislation, do we reduce that 37% tax bracket for people making above that level?
Do we reduce that bracket? That is the reduced bracket that we extend.
It is 37% going forward, though.
Yes, that's correct.
It is an extension. So
Yes.
we're going to the tax rate is going to be the same.
That's correct.
And there's a far cry from someone who's making $731,000 and someone who's a billionaire. And so I think there's a little, as my grandfather would say on those hot summer days as we pulled in the cow pasture, a little bit of smells like money in the argument that this is billionaires when we're simply extending the bracket, and that bracket starts at $731,000 for married filing jointly. And while those people are certainly doing quite well, it's a far cry from being a billionaire. Mr. Rogers, as you know, I returned from the border on Saturday, and I got an opportunity to meet with some of our troops down there, as well as the men and women with the Border Patrol, who are doing an exceptionally good job now and could have been doing that job over the last 4 years as well. And one of the things that amazed me is that, and this was actually Border Patrol that told me this, that they were by default, paroling people into the country, even if they had visible gang tattoos. If they ran the scans on them or ran the system on them and they did not have an Interpol hit, they were told to parole them into this country, even if they had visible gang tattoos. So we've got $5 billion for border security. That's a huge investment for the people of this country that I think will go a long way and pay tremendous dividends for us. We've got $7 billion for air superiority, $11 billion for Pacific deterrence, $12 billion for readiness, $13 billion for nuclear deterrence. Now, can you speak to these issues and what they mean to every American citizen and our ability to protect them from our adversaries, both at home now, more so than ever, and abroad?
Yes, sir. On the first issue with the border, I would make the point that every administration, going back to President Clinton, has had to send National Guardsmen to the border to supplement border patrol efforts. That has been a higher demand right now because of the policies of the last administration that basically opened our border for 4 years. The problem that generated for us, though, is we already are spending at the lowest level on defense that we have as a percentage of GDP since before World War II for over 80 years. So that money had to come out of Hyde. This reconciliation is going to help backfill some of the money that we've had to spend to send our guardsmen down to help secure that border. And, you know, you talked about just one leg of the triad. You know, we have a real problem with our nuclear triad, which is the most important deterrent we have to aggression in our arsenal. The Sentinel, which is going to replace the Minuteman III, the ICBMs, is way over budget, behind schedule. These are 1970s missiles that we have got to replace, and we've got to have the money to do it. This reconciliation goes a long way toward that. Our nuclear submarines, which are the most valuable element we have in the triad, we're behind on both the Virginia class and the Columbia class. This puts a lot of money toward getting them caught back up. We just have a lot of elements. You've heard about the Golden Dome, which is really a layered level of defense against attack that we have been needing for a long time. This puts $25 billion against that threat. I can go on and on. There are many threats. I really disagree with the argument that the $150 billion isn't needed. The fact is, this is just the first installment of what we need to start to get our defense back to where it should be, so that we deter aggression and stay out of wars.
Okay, what are they
Mr.
fucking
Rogers,
hiding?
thank you. I want to be respectful of other people's time. There's an additional $9 billion investment for service member quality of life, $34 billion for shipbuilding, which will be a lot of jobs that we need in this country. The $25 billion for Golden Dome. You know, our nation's defense systems, a lot of those systems are old. They were built to defend us from systems that are significantly slower and significantly larger than the weapons that we face today. And if we do not invest in that defense system, then I'm afraid we're putting ourselves at risk for hypersonics and other weapons that are extremely fast, extremely small. And I appreciate you, Mr. Rogers. I want to say this, Chairman Smith. It's always good to have two members who, for the most part, are able to work together. I appreciate your professionalism on the Armed Services Committee, and this is one we just respectfully disagree on. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our chairs and ranking members for joining us at this extraordinary hour. I also want to welcome our dedicated C-SPAN viewers and rules aficionados. You know who you are. For our special edition of DC After Dark, we're meeting in the dead of night so that House Republicans can try to jam through their disastrous reconciliation bill with zero transparency or scrutiny. This meeting began at 1 a.m. because our Republican colleagues know that a bill this bad can't be exposed to the light of day. 1 a.m. is when you work on bills that you want to hide from the public. Why would they want to hide this bill? This bill is going to enact the biggest cuts to Medicaid, the primary health insurance for nearly a quarter of Americans, in our nation's history. This bill is going to enact the biggest cuts to SNAP, which prevents Americans from going hungry in our nation's history. And this bill is going to enact the biggest tax cuts for billionaires in our nation's history. Not only that, but the Congressional Budget Office has just released analysis showing that this bill is going to result in a wealth transfer, not from the rich to the poor, but from the poor to the rich. It's a bill for which there's still no agreement to guarantee its passage. That's why some of our members here aren't here right now. They're out there trying to cut some more deals with the Speaker in the White House. And these deals aren't just tweaks, but if our colleagues' tweets are to be believed, they're so significant that those deals are going to determine whether or not this bill passes at all. Although if it does pass, it's going to be a strict party line vote. So after months of debate and deliberation in the Republican caucus, certainly not bipartisan
Republicans
debate
are
with
trying
Democrats,
to screw over
House
every
Republicans still don't
American
have an
who
agreement.
isn't filthy fucking
What have you been
rich,
doing all this time,
and
other than
Democrats
lying about whether or not you
are
were going
calling
to
them
cut
out without much
Medicaid?
power to stop
You've
it.
had multiple member meetings with the president,
The usual.
committee markups that went for dozens of hours, and you still haven't ironed out disagreements. Not only is it sloppy, it's disingenuous. We're meeting in the dead of night to consider a terrible bill, and you haven't even drafted or shared some of the most critical parts of the bill. Haven't shared them with your Republican colleagues, haven't shared them with the other half of Congress, and most importantly, you haven't shared them with the American people. As the chairwoman acknowledged when she gavelled us in at 1 a.m., if Republicans are able to pass their rule tonight, it will include a magical manager's amendment that will allow them to change the bill before it goes to the House floor. A manager's amendment that none of us have seen, that we won't be able to review or debate or change. And when we do get that magical amendment, it's likely to be dozens of pages long and include significant changes to the underlying text, to make last-minute changes, changes that will move around hundreds of billions of dollars. These deserve transparency, these deserve scrutiny, and these deserve debate. As some Republicans have suggested, y'all should probably go home for the long weekend, collect yourselves, and come back to rules when you actually have an agreement. We're here in the middle of the night, of course, because the Speaker and President are trying to rush this bill through by July 4th, a timeline that doesn't seem plausible even if Republicans manage to jam their BS version of this bill through the House this week. It's clear they don't have the votes. The deadlines are made up just so they can jam the bill before anyone really knows what's in it. And for all your consternation over this or that provision of the bill, no matter what agreement the House reaches after this tortured process, y'all know that the Senate is going to rewrite the bill anyway. Senators, Republican senators, have said this bill is a non-starter. And in addition, since the bill has not yet been finished, we don't have a CBO score, how much this bill will cost. We don't have any score except on prior versions of the bill. All we have are some back-of-the-envelope estimates cobbled together by Republicans in their backdoor meetings. Mr. Roy and Mr. Norman have long been big advocates for making sure that we have a CBO score. So it's hard to believe they're going to think it makes sense to pass a bill that doesn't yet have a CBO score, where hundreds of billions of dollars worth of taxpayers' money is penciled in by staff with a calculator, maybe a slide rule, possibly an abacus, or, you know, are they going to, as seems likely, throw caution to the wind and cave again because the president told them to? Of course, business leaders and economists are calling this bill an economic disaster that will add trillions to our national deficit by extending the tax cuts for billionaires at the expense of American families, just like the 2017 tax cuts did. We've seen this play before. The rich get richer, and the American people, working families, get left holding the bag. It was confirmed by the Congressional Budget Office just a few hours ago with a damning report that shows that this bill is going to increase the deficit likely by $3.8 trillion. It's going to cut billions from Medicaid and SNAP, and it's going to reduce household income for poorest Americans and raise household income for the richest Americans. We can't emphasize enough how insanely rushed this bill is. You're proposing major health care changes that will impact every American, whether they get their health care through Medicaid or Medicare or some other source, the impact of those Medicaid cuts will reverberate throughout our healthcare system. Cuts to Medicaid will push hospitals, nursing homes, and health clinics into bankruptcy. And when those places close, it's going to be harder for everyone else to get health care. Now, turning to the panel before us, Mr. Arrington, Mr. Boyle, I assume you both saw last week's news that Moody's downgraded the United States credit rating. And I'm sure you've read about it because one of the biggest reasons for the downgrade was extending these unfunded tax cuts for billionaires. Moody's explanation is as follows, and I quote, if the 2017 TCJA is extended, which is our base case, it will add around $4 trillion to the federal fiscal primary, excluding interest payments, deficit over the next decade. And as a result, we expect federal deficits to widen, reaching nearly 9% of GDP by 2035, up from 6.4% in 2024, driven mainly by increased interest payments on debt, rising entitlement spending, and relatively low revenue generation. We anticipate the federal debt burden will rise to about 134% of GDP by 2035, compared to 98% in 2024. So doesn't it worry any of you on that side of the dais? It certainly seems to be what you've been talking about. It seems like a pretty damning indictment of the fiscal situation that Republicans are putting us in, and one that is going to become worse if they pass this bill. There's also this tidbit from that liberal journal, the Wall Street Journal, earlier this week. And I quote, investors sold U.S. government bonds and the dollar on Monday after Moody's ratings late last week stripped the U.S. of its last AAA credit rating, citing large budget deficits and rising interest costs. Adding to the nerves about America's debt trajectory, the House Budget Committee approved a tax and spending bill Sunday that is projected to add trillions of dollars to that deficit. And another Wall Street Journal article this week was entitled "The Stark Math on the GOP Tax Plan. It Doesn't Cut the Deficit." That article put it this way: the plan won't reduce federal budget deficits and would make America's fiscal hole deeper. While Republicans who've vowed to reduce red ink say higher economic growth will fill the gap, budget analysts across the political spectrum have panned the Republican plan, warning that it worsens the U.S. fiscal picture. So there's no way around it. Your math ain't mathing. And the consequences are going to be disastrous for the entire country. Now, as we've been looking at this bill over the last few months, as it has been clear that it was going to require drastic Medicaid cuts, we do have this breaking news this evening that it's also going to impact Medicare. Mr. Boyle, this is a major revelation, and it's exactly why this bill is not ready for prime time, barely ready for the 1 a.m. time. So can you talk about how this is a backdoor cut to Medicare, which is going to cut for seniors, and what's going to happen if the bill passes?
Yes, as CBO showed, because of the deficits that are baked into the Republican bill for billionaires, that would, because of something called the Pay-As-You-Go Act, or PAYGO, that would trigger sequestration of Medicare. And it would, again, according to the Congressional Budget Office, be to the tune of over $500 billion to Medicare, one of the biggest cuts to the program. Indeed, I would say the largest outright cut to the program in American history. There are some who might want to argue and rebut that by saying, well, we'll just go ahead and waive PAYGO. It's actually impossible in reconciliation because it would not meet to the requirements of the Byrd Rule. So you cannot waive PAYGO. These cuts to Medicare will happen if this bill becomes law.
Thank you. That's obviously really concerning. Now, we've talked a little bit already about the fact that there isn't a CBO score for whatever the current version of the bill is, but we also know that there are ongoing negotiations about this bill. one of the things we've heard is that there may be an agreement on this SALT deduction, which has been so concerning to some of the Republican members. Is that agreement with respect to SALT likely to increase the deficit or decrease the deficit?
Well, I mean, obviously, if the SALT cap is raised even further than what was in the bill that was voted out of Ways and Means and passed out of budget when we basically put all of the component parts into one, then basically one of two things would happen. Either the majority would have to find even more cuts in order to pay for the loss of revenue, or you would simply see these deficits increase by even more.
Okay. That's what I thought. Thank you. The prints from Oversight and Financial Services aren't too great either. It's in these committees that our Republican colleagues snuck in some really bad stuff they're hoping will get lost in all the headlines about taxes and Medicaid. I'm really concerned by the Oversight Committee's contributions to this bill because the proposed changes to the federal employees' retirement system amount to a major pay cut for our nation's civil servants. It's a cruel policy. It takes earned compensation away from millions of hardworking people just to make a paltry dent in the staggering cost of their tax giveaways. So I know we're going to talk about the tax cuts later, but this is a multi-trillion-dollar handout to millionaires, billionaires, and Fortune 500 companies. It's the biggest government handout of all time. And to shave some dollars off the cost, Republicans are going to cut 13 million people off their health care, and it's going to force a punitive pay cut on federal employees. Mr. Lynch, I think you said 2.4 million employees. These are the public servants who work for you and me and our families and neighbors all across America, and they often do so for less pay than they would receive in the private sector, not because they're dumb, but because they're committed to public service. They give us tomorrow's weather forecast and tell us whether we need to shelter from tornadoes and floods. They prevent crop blight and the spread of dangerous diseases like bird flu. They make sure that the respirators used by coal miners and surgeons actually work. They make sure our food is safe to eat and our water is safe to drink. And these people whose pay is being so casually cut are FBI agents, Coast Guard employees, and doctors and nurses at VA facilities. So at a time when the FAA is struggling with staffing shortages that are impacting air travel, Republicans are going to make that problem worse by cutting the pay of air traffic controllers. These provisions are an unmitigated mess. I'd like to think that we can all agree,
Cutting the
no matter
pay
the
of
size
air
or
traffic
shape
controllers,
of the federal
geez,
government,
as if we're not having enough
should
trouble
be
getting
effective
enough of them
and
already.
responsive to the needs of the American people. It should be
I
able
learned
to
the other day that the
efficiently
whole air
carry
traffic
out these
controller
core
shortage is
responsibilities,
literally
and the
fucking,
provisions in this bill are undermining our ability
it's
to do
Reagan's
that.
fault.
So, Mr. Lynch, can
like
you
everything.
speak to how the oversight provisions in this bill are going to impact federal employees, including those serving in roles that are critical to our national security, our health, and our transportation safety?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Your reference to the VA is very astute. So in a city like Boston, our VA nurses probably earn between 25 and 30% less than the nurses at the private hospitals, and there are a bunch of them, right? So now what we're seeing happening is that because of the shortage of nurses that occurred after COVID, a lot of nurses just retired. Now they're pulling nurses from the VA. They're leaving the VA and they're going to work because they've got less hours, they got more pay, more benefits. So we're competing now, and you know, this is going to make it much more difficult to retain those nurses. And the ones that have been there a while are the most valuable, right? It takes a while to get a nurse trained up, you know, and fully skilled. It takes a few years. And, you know, so that's created a huge shortage in that whole metropolitan area. And that's happening all over the country where nurses are leaving the VA, doctors in some cases as well, therapists. So we're creating this real shortage at the VA. Our caseload So right now, we have a 250,000 backlog of cases at the VA because we don't have the personnel to respond to that need. So we're really in a crisis. You know, obviously the suicide hotline, we've laid off people there, which is ridiculous because we've got a crisis on our hands right now. So all of this will exacerbate the problem. You've hit on that in your remarks already, but this just amplifies the problem, tenfold with these cuts. They'll be leaving in droves.
Your remarks about the VA are very well taken, because I've heard the same thing from the VA facilities in my region, that the staffing cuts and the potential for pay cuts, the standards that are requiring nurses and doctors at the VA to see so many patients that they feel that they are not only not helping the veterans who they're trying to serve, but in some cases, the standard of care is becoming harmful. And under those circumstances, we are starting to see an exodus of doctors and nurses from the VA, which this bill is only going to put on steroids, I'm afraid.
Absolutely.
The financial services print, of course, is no better. What Republicans are trying to do here is deeply alarming. It guts the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I mean, if you want to talk about a bureau that's had a fabulous return on investment, as you mentioned, billions of dollars returned to American consumers. This bill defunds the only federal agency dedicated to making sure consumers aren't getting scammed by credit card companies, payday lenders, mortgage servicers, and shady fintech operators. It's returned over $19 billion, $21 billion, I think you said, to consumers since its founding, and that's money that was stolen or unfairly taken through illegal fees, abusive practices, or deceptive marketing, and the Bureau was able to get it back for American consumers. And now Republicans want to defend it, not because not because it's ineffective, but because it actually works, and we know why. Because the Trump administration has already started dismantling the agency from within. In the last 2 months alone, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau has quietly dropped 9 lawsuits it had brought against companies like Capital One and Rocket Homes. Years of investigation and enforcement work has been tossed in the trash with no accountability and no restitution for consumers. It's also frozen dozens of ongoing investigations, many into companies with long records of abuse. These companies have been accused of everything from improper loan servicing and unfair interest charges to failure to protect sensitive consumer data. And now, thanks to new political leadership handpicked by the Trump White House, those investigations are dead. Investigators can't call witnesses, issue subpoenas, or even talk to company lawyers unless they get direct political approval, and that approval isn't coming. Meanwhile, these very same companies, it's such an amazing coincidence, have given generously to Mr. Trump's campaign and especially his inauguration fund. Meta, the parent company of Facebook under investigation for allegedly misusing consumer financial data, donated $1 million to the inaugural committee. Greenlight, a fintech company accused of misleading families about debit card access, is backed by a Trump-aligned venture capital firm. And Elon Musk, whose company is launching a new mobile payments business, posted "delete the CFPB" on his social media after Trump's election. And of course, we've heard quite a bit about how much he's donated. So this isn't policy, it's payback. This is what happens when you let billionaires and campaign donors write the rules. And now House Republicans are trying to finish the job by defunding the CFPB entirely.
People.
So, Ranking Member Waters, can you speak more about this apparent corruption happening at the CFPB?
Well, allow me to say to you, Ms. Scanlon, you aptly described what has been happening with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It is one of the most needed and effective agencies of government that have done everything that you said they've done to assist our consumers. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has been hated by the Republicans ever since it came into its existence. They have tried to kill it, and we've been in court all the way to the Supreme Court on several issues, and we keep beating them back. But now, Trump and this administration want to cut them, even though we tried to protect them when we created them by having their financing come directly from the feds rather than going through the Appropriations Committee. And they tried to attack that and other ways by which they thought they could get to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They're finally coming up with ways by which they think they can do that. But the way that we have been in the courts with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they still would be alive after a huge cut. But they would sit there and not be able to do anything. They wouldn't be able to do the investigation. They would not be able to protect those very consumers that the law created them to take care of. And so there are many in this country who fight very hard and are very disgusted with what is happening in an attempt to basically undermine them and get rid of them. This is a terrible thing that this administration is doing. You would think that both Democrats and Republicans would care enough about the consumers that they would protect this one agency that has demonstrated that they can do the work and the investigations to help get rid of fraud and ripoffs, as you have identified. And so this is what we should be fighting. I'm going to continue to fight. Like I said, I was there at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and we're all worried so very much about what is going to happen if, in fact, the administration has its way. And again, you have correctly identified it and talked about it in ways that everybody should understand.
It's really stunning that an agency that has been this successful in protecting American consumers is being zeroed out, when the only folks who are going to benefit are going to be large corporations and folks who are taking advantage of Americans. And I would, apparently we don't, but I would hope that we would have bipartisan agreement that an agency like that should remain in place. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Jack, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And Chairman Comer, given that I serve on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, I will focus my line of questioning on you. And I'll just note from the outset, too, that you've done an incredible job with your leadership with the committee. You do a great job for your district, for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and our country. You referenced this in your opening testimony, but could you just clarify for the committee your legislative jurisdiction over mandatory spending? It's pretty narrow, is it not?
You're exactly right. Let me say, you're a good member of the Oversight Committee, Mr. Jack. We're glad to have you on there. But our jurisdiction was very limited to mandatory spending. All we had that would fall in the legislative jurisdiction would have been the federal employee benefits.
Fair enough. And it's my understanding that federal employees get a hybrid pension that consists of both a 401k type defined contribution plan known as Thrift Savings Plan, or TSP, and a defined benefit annuity known as the Federal Employees Retirement System, or FERS. How do these benefits contrast with those offered in the private sector?
Yeah, you're right. The private sector employers have shifted away from defined benefits towards defined contribution retirement benefit programs in recent years, and unlike what's provided in the federal service, few private sector employers actually maintain both such benefits for retirees. In fact, a recent Department of Labor report indicates that only 15% of private sector civilian workforce had access to both defined benefit and defined contribution.
They don't want Americans watching.
And a question many of my constituents ask is, do taxpayers fund pensions for federal employees that are generally more generous than the ones they themselves receive, and are there any credible recent studies on that?
Yes, according to a 2024 CBO report that I requested, CBO found that in 2022, federal employee benefits cost about $31 per hour worked, and $22 per hour worked for private sector employees. Thus, benefits for federal workers cost 43% more per hour worked on average than benefits for private sector private sector workers.
Fair enough. One thing that you've mentioned in your testimony, and I've heard you speak over and over about, more than 2 million federal retired employees currently receive federal pension benefits costing more than $100 billion annually, with taxpayers shouldering most of the expense. I just want to repeat that for the committee. 2 million federal retired employees that currently receive over $100 billion in benefits from taxpayers combined together. And just to be abundantly clear to those who spread this information, the changes your committee print makes to the federal retirement system do not affect the benefits of those retired employees. Is that a fair statement?
That is 100% correct. That is opposite of what some of the Democrats in Congress have been saying. It does not affect those. The benefits of those already retired are not impacted, and the change we make to the FERS benefits, the supplemental retirement benefits, takes effect for those retiring after 2027, so that's a 2-year delay.
Exactly. And just to clarify, for those future employees, people that may not be hired for years from now, I think they're given a choice when they're hired.
Right.
It changes in that aspect, but for those retired, it does not. But could you just walk us through what happens as it relates to those who may be hired in the future?
Yeah, in the future, they're going to have a choice. They can be an at-will employee, or they can be the traditional government employee that Mr. McGovern cherishes. And if they're an at-will employee, they would receive a higher benefit. If they want to be a traditional employee that's protected with the very generous federal employee personnel laws that are on the books, then they can do that. So I think this is our proposal saves billions of dollars, and I think it gives federal workers a choice.
Well, one thing I want to focus on as well is, my district, I'm just south of the Atlanta airport. I represent an enormous amount of air traffic controllers and heard a lot from the air traffic controllers throughout this entire process, and would just love for you to walk the committee through how air traffic controllers are treated as it relates to some of these changes. I know we worked at great lengths to ensure that we're recruiting the best, enabling the best system for air traffic controllers to thrive so we can keep our skies safe.
Yeah, and Mr. Jack, you've done a great job advocating for them on the Oversight Committee, and I want to correct a statement that was stated by a Democrat on the Rules Committee earlier. The air traffic controllers are exempted from any changes in this bill. That's in print, so that needs to be clarified. They're completely exempted from any changes.
And law enforcement officers, federal firefighters.
That's right, Border Patrol.
Wonderful. And as it relates to Border Patrol, just a helpful point as I round out my time, you also achieve savings by removing ineligible dependents from the federal employee health insurance program. I applaud this provision. Taxpayers should not bear the cost of fraud and error committed by federal employees, and did not, just correct me if wrong, did this provision get bipartisan support when it was taken up by the committee last Congress?
It did, and that's something that we should all be applauding here. This is an audit
25 years,
to ensure that there aren't people on the benefits plan that are ineligible, and that's kind of what Brett Guthrie
At this rate,
done
none of us will
with
ever retire.
Medicaid. We're not cutting Medicaid. We're not cutting these benefit.
You are cutting
with
Medicaid.
That provision, we're trying to ensure that
You're cutting it by $500 billion.
who are on the system are truly eligible, and to remove those that are ineligible. GAO report estimated that if we do this audit, it'll save $1.5 billion taxpayer
Not
money. So
$500
I think
billion.
that's a pretty good deal for the American taxpayer.
The fuck is
Well,
wrong
I
with
appreciate
you,
your
dude?
leadership. I very much am grateful for yourself and all that worked on the committee to help support air traffic controllers. It's very important to my district. And with that, Madam Chair, I respectfully yield back.
Madam Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Madam Chair, I just want to point out, you called this meeting, and I'm looking at who's here. There's 4 of us and only 3 of you. And your members can't be bothered to even sit here and listen to the witnesses. And I just say that because if that continues, we're going to move to adjourn. So I hope that your members will, since you called this meeting will actually be here, present, and listening to the, being in the other room is not being here. So I just point that out and say that we will feel obligated to move to adjourn again if that continues. Thank you.
Mr. McGovern, our members are in and out, just like your members are in and out. You were gone for about 30 minutes. And so we always allow people to move in and out.
There are more of us
meetings.
here right now, and we're in the minority.
Well,
Just point it out.
our members.
This has been a
here.
tactic in the Agriculture Committee, I don't know about the other committees, where Republicans just get up and leave. And so I think people ought to be present here. At least you ought to have more of you here than us here. Thank you.
There are more of us here than you, so there's no reason to delay this meeting any longer than it is. Mr. Negus, what I'm saying is there's no
Someone
need
sneeze on her,
to delay this meeting any longer than we have to. Thank you.
Put her out of her misery.
Recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, all the chairs and ranking members. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your testimony. Got a lot of questions, but I guess first I want to, maybe if the chairwoman would indulge me, give her an opportunity to say a word, and that is my assumption, and I think the assumption for most Americans, is that the reason Republicans have decided to notice this hearing and proceed in the dead of night is because this bill is indefensible. It sounds like maybe you have a different reason, and so I guess I'm trying to understand, why was this meeting scheduled for 1 a.m.? Why are we meeting at 3 a.m.? What was the rationale? Or is there a rationale that am I mistaken?
I think my opening statement stands for itself, Mr. Negus.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, Madam Chair. I would just say, I mean, your opening statement essentially, as best as I could tell, were ruminations about, what happened in 2007, 20 years ago. I wasn't here. Most of us weren't here. I don't know that that is a cogent rationale to
2022, two and a half years ago.
And so the basis for scheduling this hearing in the dead of night is that you've decided that this is just the way things should work, and that this is, I mean, I'll just proceed. I'll just say this, Madam Chair. It does not take more than a cursory review online to find quotes from just about every member on the other side of the dais, including you, Madam Chair, back in 2009, again, it's a long time ago, regarding a stimulus bill that you described as rush legislation that was thrown together, quote, who threw together the final stimulus bill in the dead of night. Another bill that you, quote, said, the bill that was finalized in the dark of night. So I think it's an unfair and unreasonable mischaracterization of our position and with respect to the disagreement we have about this process unfolding in the dead of night. And it makes no sense to me why House Republicans didn't notice this hearing for 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. It would not have been a difficult thing to say, yeah, instead of meeting at 1 a.m., we're just going to meet in the morning. And the American people are going to be able to watch and hear this fulsome debate and be able to reach their own conclusions. That doesn't seem like an unreasonable position to take. And I suppose, and maybe I'll start with Chairman Arrington, because I know him to be a reasonable person. Welcome back to the committee. I don't know.
Now I'm nervous.
Well, I don't think you were here in 2007 either. Maybe you were.
No,
I don't think you were. Is this, I mean, you can't possibly agree that it is a prudent thing to do to have this hearing at 3 a.m. I mean, is this how you imagined legislation would be made in Washington when you were running for Congress, Mr. Chairman? Really?
I imagined that we would have the sense of urgency to complete the task in the time frame that we set.
And so the 5 hours between doing it at 1 a.m. and doing it at 6 a.m., that's the urgency you're describing? What deadline is there on Thursday or tomorrow, I guess tonight, getting this bill done? What is the...
Well, as you know, there are time frames associated with each phase of the process when you are conducting regular order. I'm very proud that this has been bottom-up, committee and member-driven, and it's been a regular order process.
Mr. Arrington...
And the goal was to have it done by Memorial
All right,
Weekend.
I was hoping I could...
I'm not saying
you would give me an intellectually honest answer, the kind of answer I think that your constituents and my constituents in Colorado and your constituents in Texas would expect, which is to say, obviously, this isn't reasonable. It does not make sense. This isn't transparent to hold hearings at 3 a.m. on a bill of this size and this scope and this scale. That's not in the best interests of the country. You could just as easily delay it 5 hours, let the American public have an opportunity to listen to this debate, and then vote on the bill on Thursday. And all of you could go home for the district work period. So I don't, this false sense of urgency for 5 or 6 hours makes no sense. It's and again, I understand that's your rationale. I think the American people are smarter than the House Republican caucus are giving them credit for. They know what this is about, and when they wake up, invariably, later this morning, and they find that this bill was reported out of this committee in the dead of night, I think they'll reach their own conclusions about House Republicans' commitment or lack thereof to transparency. And just for the record, because I want to be an equal opportunity advocate here with respect to some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle who serve on this committee, who apparently have decided not to attend the very hearing that they demanded we hold in the middle of the night. But they have spent years condemning late-night rule committee markups and bills that are reported out. Mr. Norman, I'm just going to read some of his greatest hits. This is from 2019. 2,300 pages, less than 24 hours to read, debate, and vote. Oh, and $400 billion added to our national debt. That's an ex post. Another one. New swamp minibus dropped at 2 a.m. It was actually earlier, I guess, than where we find ourselves today. We're expected to vote on $1 trillion in spending tomorrow. It's 1,000 plus pages. This won't be good. Diving in now. Another one. You'd never be expected to sign a 1,000-page document to buy a new car in a day. Why should Congress be expected to sign off on 1,000 plus pages resulting in $1.2 trillion in spending in a day? That's our colleague, Mr. Norman. I'll be very interested to what he has to say when we wrap this hearing up at 10, 11 a.m. later this morning. Mr. Arrington, I want to talk about the deficit. I've known you historically to be, I thought, somewhat of a deficit hawk. At least that was my, is that a fair characterization?
That is fair.
At least prior to this bill?
Even with this bill that
let's get into
reduces
that.
the debt.
I'll ask you a couple questions on that front. Okay, so here's a press release. This is from March 25th of this year. A gentleman by the name of Ray Dalio. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting him. It says, Ray Dalio to House GOP. This is on the House Budget Committee's website. Cut the budget deficit to 3% of GDP. This was his admonition to you and to your Republican colleagues that it was a laudable goal to try to get the deficit to 3% of the GDP. Do you agree that that's a laudable goal?
Yes.
Is that something you're passionate about?
Absolutely.
What's fascinating is that the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget just issued a press release today. You might have heard it. You might have read it. I'll read you the headline. House bill would put 3% deficit far out of reach. So this goal that you have, that you seem to be particularly passionate about, is one that is not embedded in this bill that you're asking your colleagues to support, according to the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. You're familiar with that organization?
I am.
And I think they've featured you at different times. I think they've applauded you, if I'm not mistaken, in the past.
They're good people, and good people can disagree.
Let me read to you what these good people have said about your bill. They have said, and I'll quote, unfortunately, the House Reconciliation Bill, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, would increase deficits significantly. The House Reconciliation Bill would put the 3% deficit target further out of reach. These are your allies. I mean, these are people who are fighting for a responsible federal budget, who've been imploring the Congress to take deficits seriously. A month ago, you had folks coming in saying, Mr. Chairman, get to that 3% target. And now you have these experts that you've praised in the past telling you you're way off the mark. Make it make sense, Mr. Chairman.
Well, to get to a 3% deficit to GDP, which would stabilize the debt, you've heard the Secretary of Treasury establish a similar metric, would take $7+ trillion in spending reduction. It's a great goal, and it's a clear one, and it's measurable. But just like coming out of the World War II, 120 roughly percent debt to GDP. We're comparable to that today, actually have exceeded it. It took time. And I would say
No, it
this
wasn't
is
accidental cottage. They literally on
substantial,
purpose scheduled it for
effort
1 a.m.
and
so
step
that no one would be awake
to
to watch
begin
them do
bending
this.
the curve on debt to GDP. So my analysis is different from,
This is the
my
big,
friends in the organization
beautiful
that you mentioned.
budget, the big
Different
billionaire
different
budget.
isn't the word I would
Technically,
use.
it's
I mean,
not the
different
actual
is-
vote.
it
It's
is when
the
the
different
debate
is
in
one
the
opinion, it was a bit of a
House- it's the
deviation.
House rules
They
debate.
are saying you are wrong.
Yeah.
I didn't quote it length. I mean, I'll just keep reading here. In 2022, in 2027, we estimate the House reconciliation bill would boost deficits to about 7% of GDP, which is more than double Besant's, the Treasury Secretary that you referenced, proposed fiscal target 1.8% of GDP above current law and 0.7% of GDP higher than a simple extension of the Tax Cut and Job Act's individual provisions. What they're saying, I think, is that if you just simply extended the tax bill and didn't do anything else, you would reduce the deficit more than what you've done here.
I don't know how that could be even possible.
Well,
because
I'm reading their press release.
But we reduced, just let's think through this. We reduced spending by 1.7 roughly trillion dollars. And they're suggesting by extending the tax cuts without that reduction in
They
spending,
scheduled
we would
the
be
meeting
better
for
off.
1
I
a.m.
think I can
so
tell you
that
why.
Americans
and
wouldn't
I
watch
want
them
to give
do
the
this.
ranking member of the Budget Committee opportunity. It's because of the tax breaks that you have given to the richest Americans embedded in this bill, such that at the end of the day, the savings that you've described ultimately don't put the dent into the deficit that you proclaim. Ranking Member Boyle, you can correct me if I'm mistaken about that.
I like you both, but Nagus has the better side of the argument, I think quite clearly. I would point out a few things. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget is, I have to say, admirably independent, and at times they are an equal opportunity afflictor of both sides of the political divide, depending on the piece of legislation that's coming down the pike. Their credibility is quite clear. They've been consistent when it comes to deficit and debt, and they are calling out the intellectual dishonesty in this piece of legislation. There's actually a conservative think tank called the Manhattan Institute, which indicates that the Republican bill is actually the most expensive piece of legislation since the 1960s, since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. So it's no accident that Moody's chose this past Friday to, for the first time in American history, downgrade our debt. They've been withholding joining the other two credit agencies, one of which had downgraded our debt back in 2011 when the Tea Party Congress drove us right up to the brink in terms of whether or not we would have a debt ceiling crisis. And then there was another credit downgrade by a different credit agency a couple years ago, which was also related to another potential crisis in terms of the debt ceiling, though that credit downgrade a couple years ago did also reference the future trajectory of our debt. And now here we are with Moody's, for whom the trajectory, because of this legislation, of our deficits and debt was finally what prompted them to be the last of the three credit agencies to downgrade our debt. So finally, as you pointed out, what we're seeing in the bond market, that can't be spun. That can't be papered over with a gimmick like current policy baseline. The reality is these markets are charging us more now for our debt, which means higher mortgages, higher auto loan rates, higher costs for the American people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Ranking Member Boyle. And as I go through the constellation of the entities and the individuals that have opined as to the impact of this bill on the deficit, it's pretty clear to me the conclusion. Apparently, the CBO...
A lot more than we pay ourselves.
The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, I was unaware of the Manhattan Institute's conclusions. I guess we'll add them to the list. By the way, Republicans also, Republican senators, right? I mean, Chairman, you're aware of, we don't have to go through the litany of the statements. I mean, I'm happy to read them to you, but you're aware of what Senator Rand Paul and, other colleagues of yours in the upper chamber have said about this bill and about their concerns regarding the deficit.
Well,
it's 3 a.m. Why not? I'll offer a few of these. May as well. This was Rand Paul today. Apparently, the speaker, I guess, met with the Senate Republicans, and this is Rand Paul's quote. Quote, the speaker basically said that conservatives just have to live with raising the debt ceiling $5 trillion or $4 trillion, which is a historic amount. And I'm one conservative who won't live with that. Senator Ron Johnson, this is a week and a half ago, quote, the one big beautiful bill, I never thought I'd be quoting Senator Johnson, but anyway, I digress. The one big beautiful bill that Congress is working on is certainly big, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Too often, the reality of these budget debates get obscured in details, politically charged issues, and demagoguery. Under every scenario now being considered, federal debt continues to skyrocket from its current level of almost $37 trillion. And I could go on. So Republican senators, the CBO, the Committee for the Responsible Federal Budget, my Democratic colleagues, everyone who's looked at this bill seems to conclude it is going to blow up our deficit. Everyone but you, Mr. Chairman. And I just can't understand why.
Would you like me to explain?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I don't know if you know what the annual average GDP was during Trump's tenure prior to COVID, and I'm not going to ask you the questions.
I appreciate that.
But it was close to what the annual average GDP rate was for President Biden, actually, if you control for COVID, around 2.8. It was 1.8 when President Trump took over in his first year of his first term. He was able, because of the pro-growth policies, including the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but also massive deregulation efforts, America First trade, et cetera, good energy policy, was able to move the needle by an entire 100 basis points, which over the budget window is about $3 trillion. So just to be conservative, we locked in an assumption that was lower than both, 2.6. So ironically, CBO projects the annual average growth rate at this point, which I think is actually pretty aggressive, given that they assume the tax cuts would expire, is 1.8%. So to have a conservative assumption of 2.6 plus the $1.7 trillion in spending reduction actually not only balances, but in 10 years it reduces the deficit, and more importantly, it brings the debt to GDP down, which I think is the best measure of the fiscal health of our country, by 10 percentage points. When has that ever happened?
I've given you some room to respond on that.
Thank you for the time.
Of course. Can I tell you what the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget said about?
I wish you wouldn't.
I'd be happy to, because they actually looked at this exact issue.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's important. And they said, and I'll quote, most analyses have found that the House bill, that the House bill would have either a modest positive or modest negative effect on output and would not meaningfully change the annual growth rate. Yet even with the concurrent budget resolution's assumptions of 2.6%, the very percent that you just identified, average real annual growth, which is quite optimistic in the near term and highly unrealistic over a decade, deficits would remain well above the 3% target. Mr. Chairman, look, I get it.
It's one source, but
we've been through this routine previously.
Yes.
I know when you testified in front of the committee before, I recognize you're here selling a product that I honestly don't think that you agree with, but I understand the assignment. And so I will just simply tell you, I don't think that this bill is in the best interest of the fiscal health of our country. And there's a reason why virtually every expert has reached the same conclusion. I want to ask some questions of Chairman Hill, if he might indulge me. So can you just describe to us, Chairman Hill, the impetus behind the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board?
Public Company Oversight Board, what we've done is we've transferred.
No, not what you've done recently. I'm asking, why do we have it? How was it created?
It was created during the crisis around the failure of Enron.
That's right, right? So it's in the wake of Enron, in the wake of WorldCom, in the
And there
wake
was
of...
an assertion by the Congress at that time that all public accounting firms needed an independent regulatory body.
Correct. And that assertion, you probably are aware, was supported by an overwhelming majority of the Congress.
It was.
You know how many...
And so we're continuing that
I
oversight
know.
of public...
Do you know how many members of Congress voted for that bill to create the Public Accounting Oversight Board?
The vast, vast majority. Very few people voted no.
431.
Yeah.
431, signed into law by President Bush, right? And you all have chosen to eliminate it, right?
Not true.
You're not eliminating it.
No, we're transferring the authority to oversee the public accounting from the PCAOB to the SEC.
To the SEC, got it. But you're not allocating any funding to the SEC to actually perform these duties, right? There's no money in this bill for that.
We are taking the fees that were being charged to the companies and eliminating those fees.
I understand you're eliminating the fees, yeah. So my point is, you've said, I'm not dismantling the agency, but we're moving it to the SEC. But we're not giving the SEC a dime to do any of these critical accounting functions that virtually every Republican in the United States Congress supported a mere 20 years ago, right?
We're cutting the mandatory spending that is in this, currently in the budget for the PCOB, transferring those authorities to the SEC, and I'm sure they can come to the Congress for appropriations.
Got it. So in the interim, there will be no public accounting oversight activities, right? Yeah.
That's not true. The work of overseeing the public accounting firms will continue.
By who?
We've contemplated that in the bill in the terms of the phase out. It's in the reconciliation bill.
Describe it to us. I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand. You're saying it gets moved over to the SEC. There's no new funds. There's no mandate that there be...
There's a phase-out period in the reconciliation bill, and that will afford the SEC the opportunity to seek appropriation.
So does the bill it gives the SEC the opportunity to seek appropriation. So until that agent, and of course we have no idea as to whether or not the Congress will ultimately consent to that appropriation request. There's also no language in this bill that mandates that the Public Accounting Board, the personnel who work for this entity now that's been in existence for 20-some odd years, are rehired by the SEC.
That's true.
Okay. This is coupled with, obviously, we've gone to great length, and Ranking Member articulated well the cuts to the CFPB, and I know you don't contest that, the 70% cut, obviously, to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
We're taking the cap of the amount of money the CFPB can request from the Fed from 12% to 5%. It's not being cut, as the gentleman from Pennsylvania asserted, to zero. It's also not the only agency that does consumer compliance in the financial services sector.
I understand your rationale with respect to that secondary part, but I just want to zero in here on the financial piece, because I guess my read of the bill was that it will significantly reduce the funds that are available for the CFPB to be able to perform the duties that it's responsible for executing under federal law.
The CFPB is often lost in federal court time and time again for exceeding its authority, proposing regulations that are not statutorily approved, proposing new functions that are not statutorily approved by Congress. And we believe that the money that is in the 5% cap is adequate for them to do their compliance responsibilities under the Act.
Yeah. Again, I got your question. I hear your rationale for opposing the CFPB. I was just trying to get a better sense of...
I didn't say that. I said we think this is the adequate
that's
funding.
Adequate for them to perform the function, but that it is a significant reduction in the resources that they have. And I understand...
In FY 2019, it was exactly around $250 million. This year in FY 25, they're proposing $800 million in spending. And yet, in our view, the spending is adequate to be at $250 million, looking at their own analysis of their own personnel, compared from when it was at its full initial operating phase in 2012 and comparing it to today. We believe it's adequate.
Okay. Financial Stability Oversight Council, reducing funding by 90%.
No.
No?
What we've done is the fees that are the budget for the Financial Stability Oversight Council, which is supported by bipartisan members in the Congress. Right. We're simply saying that it's the actual expenses. So the Office of Financial Research, where that revenue takes place, we've looked at the 3 years average use to support the FSOX operation. We've capped it at that 3-year average level for the actual functioning expenses of FSOC. We're not eliminating FSOC. We're not eliminating the funding for FSOC.
I want to give the ranking member an opportunity to respond, and perhaps she can clarify if I'm misunderstanding the nature of the way in which FSOC's funding will be implicated. So I'd like to have that clarified.
Hanging out. Good night.
First of all, I want to go back to
The microphone.
I want to say a word about the PCOB that is being transferred. You talked about the fact that the PCAOB was being transferred to the SEC. And you wanted to know whether or not there were any funds that followed that. And the answer by Chairman Hill was that they could come and ask for more money. But it is really a lot more serious than simply whether or not they have the money. They had a hard time getting an agreement with the Chinese that are in our financial markets. But under the Biden administration, they were able to work out an agreement with the Chinese that was very, very important.
Yeah, no problem.
Now, that agreement does not extend to the SEC.
Get to sleep soon, though.
And so that means that the SEC, the auditors won't be able, perhaps, to deal with China, Germany, and a lot of the other places. So this is very, very serious, and I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, right.
Next, you were talking about the council.
FSOC.
About why it is so important and what is happening to it. Well, the council is very important because we are at a time when all of these crazy tariffs are being initiated by the President of the United States of America, and we have rising inflation also. This means that the cost of loans are going to be much more expensive. I want you to know that investors around the world are freaking out, unsettled about what is happening. And so what you have is not only the unsettlement, but the uncertainty that is being created by these tariffs. And we haven't talked a lot about tariffs here tonight. And the president is giving all these excuses why he wakes up in the morning and decides that he's going to change the amount of the tariffs. And he said that the reason that we're having all these tariffs is they aren't paying their fair share, and he's going to use the new money that he's going to collect for manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. He's going to do all of that. However, I want you to know that these tariffs are being placed on bananas and coffee, and that has nothing to do with what he's saying he's going to use the money for. So the council is so very important as we take a look at what needs to be known with this crisis that's being created and how the federal government could get involved much sooner than what happened in 2008. And so we need it. If you just take a look at what happened with AIG, which is one of the biggest problems that had to be corrected, they got in charge of that, and they were able to not only give new oversight, but it was restructured, and it was no longer a threat. So it's very important to have the council and the research that goes along with it.
Well, I would say, thank you, Madam Ranking Member, and I would just say, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Hill, I respect your expertise. I know you've worked on these issues. I know you've served in the Treasury Department, and I understand the policy reasons that you might have, and
we were directed,
and believe. Well, let me. It wasn't a question. That you believe with respect to some of the changes that you're seeking to make. My simple suggestion is that the changes you are making to the Accounting Board, to the CFPB, to FSOC, taken together in the aggregate, all of these agencies, these entities were created for a reason, right? And they were in the wake of very serious financial crises that engulfed our country. And I don't think that it's in the best interest of American consumers to pursue these kinds of changes. I also think they're policy changes, and that, you know, ultimately if the parliamentarian in the Senate is abiding by precedent, that they shouldn't make it through the birdbath, but that's a different inquiry. So in any event, I will move on. My final question to Chairman Comer. Mr. Chairman, so with respect to the exchange you were having with one of my colleagues earlier about the exemptions that you all crafted into the bill regarding air traffic controllers, that's in relation to the at-will, this distinction essentially between giving federal employees the choice of choosing the at-will employment versus non-at-will employment, federal protections, but a higher retirement contribution. Am I right that that's what the exemption is applying to?
What's that? I mean, I don't understand your question.
Why don't you describe to me, I wanted to better understand the new language, the language that you all have adopted regarding air traffic controllers and law enforcement.
They're exempted from any changes.
Any of the changes that you all are making with respect to the federal benefits system.
Funny.
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay. That didn't exist in the original bill, or was that not the case?
There were exemptions for Border Patrol, and they were, I guess you could say, partially exempt.
Yeah, and that's the genesis of my question was, okay. I'm really drilling down on, and your staff director, I think can probably attest to this issue around the provision that I would say compels, you would say offers federal employees this choice to choose at-will employment and
but not for
a higher contribution for their retirement benefits, right? Or to stay within the federal protected system and have to pay a higher contribution on their end. That original provision did not have the exemptions that you all have added now for law enforcement, for Border Patrol, for air traffic controllers. That wasn't in the bill that you all marked up a few days ago that the Republican majority on the bill approved. Or am I wrong about that?
That's correct.
Okay. What I am interested in is, was there a discussion, and are you willing to have a discussion, particularly as you consider a manager's amendment, to draw out a similar exemption for veterans? So veterans who have rights under the in the current system, if you're a veteran and you work at any of our federal agencies, right, but you don't fall into this particular job classification exemption, you have rights before the Merit Systems Protection Board that you can adjudicate, right, as a veteran. And my point is to simply say, why wouldn't you draw out this exemption to include veterans, irrespective of whether or not they fall into this
the guy's been defending this whole, choice.
Look,
he should ask,
the bill
why
could
is there
be
an
amended
exemption?
through the process. I mean, this is
why make
we
an
passed
exemption for
out-
police?
We were given
CBP,
instructions
whatever.
to say $51 billion.
Have him be
We
like,
met that.
because blah, 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 blah. Be like,
And look,
okay, so if
during
it's good to give them the
discussions,
choice,
there's gonna be,
why do you not want
minor
to, why do
changes
you want
made
to
here and there.
punish
With respect
police
to
and
at-will, I want to
CBP?
make it clear there are
If
certain
you want to
states,
reward police
that have at-will civil service employees.
and
Some of
CBP,
those
you
states are
acknowledge
Georgia,
that
Texas,
giving the
Florida,
choice is the
and
bad
Utah.
option. You know what I mean?
So,
That's
I
the
don't think
question you
there's
should be
anything
asking, in my opinion.
groundbreaking or unique here.
No, I'm not. But what I'm suggesting is you crafted this exemption over the course of the last 72 hours. You added a very large exemption to this bill. That's an exemption I support, by the way, with respect to what you've drawn out here. Clearly, you have the capacity to just add veterans. You could do that now. There's negotiations apparently happening somewhere in this building.
This is a good gotcha, too.
Ranking Member McGovern and Ranking Member McGovern and Chairman Arrington.
Since you can just throw in whatever the fuck you want, whatever exemption you want,
I don't really understand
why aren't you doing it for
wouldn't just
veterans?
make the case to the leadership, respectfully, Mr. Chairman, to say, okay, if this exemption was worth pursuing, let's add veterans as well, so that we're not forcing veterans into this Hobson's choice that we've decided we did not want to force upon firefighters, air traffic controllers, and other law enforcement officials. I think that's a reasonable request to make on behalf of our nation's veterans. And as you know, a large portion of the federal workforce are veterans. So I think that this would be the least we could do. And I would implore you, I don't know if you have further thoughts on that, but I mean, you're the chairman, and I assume
we've already passed our bill out of the committee, so it's not.
But you added this after it passed.
You marked up the bill. That's my point. You passed the bill. It included no exemptions for police officers, for firefighters, for border patrol. It was a limited exemption, as your staff director noted. You've added that in the last couple of days because there were stakeholders who made clear their outrage, which, by the way, was expressed by Democrats, I understand, during the markup. And Ranking Member Lynch can comment on that if he'd like. But I think Democratic members of the committee made the case.
Yeah, they're
that this
doing
ought to
some.
They want, obviously, we believe it should be.
Well,
eliminated
Democrats
entirely,
want to
but-
spend,
Stuff.
into oblivion.
They're
I mean,
using a
if
name
it were
for it
just
tonight.
Democrats, there wouldn't be any cuts.
Well,
We
I
just
would-
keep spending money.
I
keep
would-
adding
I
to
would
the
not
deficit.
call-
I mean,
I would-
somebody
I
has
would-
to step
That's
up.
fine.
and
not
this is-
call-
We're on an
Mr.
unsustainable
Mr.
path.
Neguse,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
respectfully, I would
Neguse,
not call. I'm
Mr.
almost done,
Neguse,
Chair. I would respectfully
You
say-
ask a question.
He
Mr.
answered.
Comer was attempting to answer
He
your
answered.
question.
Okay.
You know,
Oh, God,
Mr.
she's
Neguse,
the
there is
fucking
no
worst.
prize here for talking
Someone give her
the
COVID
longest.
already, please.
Well,
And
Madam Chair,
so,
I had intended to finish, but I've got about 7 more questions.
Kind
I
of
guess I'll pursue
interesting
Mr. Comer.
that
Mr.
with
Comer,
all
go
these
ahead
like
and finish
COVID
your question.
exemptions, it's like
Well, your
above
answer.
65 still get it. So what,
I've
like
stated the obvious.
99% of
We are
Congress
trying
are still
to,
going to get their
do
COVID
the
shots,
best we
but
can,
most of us aren't.
to be fiscally
Okay.
responsible. It's no fun when you have to make cuts. You all don't know what that's like. You've never cut anything
The
in your life.
fucking
You just
irony,
continue
the
to
deficit
spend,
always
spend, spend.
climbs
We're
under
on an
Republicans,
unsustainable
and
path. We
the
have
only time
limited
we've actually like
jurisdiction on the
had
Oversight Committee. We're
surplus
very
in
passionate
the
about
last 40
eliminating waste,
fucking
fraud,
years has
abuse,
been
and
under a
mismanagement of the federal
Democrat.
government. With respect to this bill, we had a limited portion of jurisdiction. And I think that we've been very transparent with the process. We passed out of committee a bill that saved the taxpayers $51 billion. There have been
What?
changes made, as there always
You're
is.
adding $4 trillion.
Once the bill
Shut
passes
the
committee
fuck
before
up.
it's,
God,
voted
all they
on
do
the
is
floor. So I
lie.
don't know what else there is to say.
Lie.
So I would say to you, now that you've apparently concluded your answer, that my question was really simple. Really simple. I wasn't asking you to draw out exemptions for this category of folks and other categories of folks. It was very simple. A simple question, which was, are you willing to consider carving out an exemption for our nation's veterans in the same way that you drew out an exemption after the committee marked up this bill? I don't think that's spending into oblivion to say that our nation's veterans should be exempted in the same way that our
Really?
law enforcement and border patrol agents and air traffic controllers. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. Ranking Member Lynch, do you think that's an unreasonable request?
No, as a matter of fact, one of the amendments I have is to exempt them from the change in the calculation going from the high 3 to high 5. We would maintain the veterans at the high 3, and
just to be clear, they could do that right now.
They could, and the cost, and they've done it, as
She
you pointed
deserves
out.
it,
They've done it
Magic,
for
if that makes you feel
a
better.
narrow subset of
She's a gazillion years
employees.
old and destroying
And
this fucking
that,
country.
You know,
with a smirk on her ugly
the
ass
high
old fucking
3
face.
instead of the high 5 was
She's gonna be dead before
about
anyone has to deal with the consequences of what she's doing today.
per employee over 20 years of retirement. Not a huge sum of money, but definitely appropriate, given that a veteran must have served honorably and discharged honorably for them to be eligible for these benefits.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more, Mr. Lynch. And again, Republicans are negotiating right now as we speak on SALT deductions and tax credits and any host of issues that members of your caucus have. And I would think that the least they could do is entertain, or at least not treat it so gingerly that the response of, it's spending into oblivion because we have a simple request. It was the only question that I asked you, Mr. Comer, and so I'm taken aback by your answer. But anyway, I will yield back, bounce my time. I thank the ranking members and the chairs for being here.
I have to go to sleep soon, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Neguse. Ms. Houchin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here this evening and particularly to our committee chairs for their hard work on this reconciliation bill. Many hours have gone into this, many hours of debate outside of tonight in broad daylight have gone on this bill. I want to make a few points before I get into questions, and that is in response to a few of the things that have been said by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. One of the things that's been said is that this is a transfer of wealth. What I would say to that is that the only transfer of wealth, resources, and protection of the American people that is occurring right now is a transfer from the American people on behalf of illegal immigrants. That's what's been happening over the last several years under the Biden administration. This bill's also been called a scam. But the only scam that's being played is a scam by the Democrats on the American people for fear-mongering about what this bill is actually doing.
Oh, God.
Once again, and I'm going to go to
We're going to find out. I don't know why you guys are
former
lying.
Committee
It's
of
like
Financial
as
Services
though
and go to
people aren't
Chairman
gonna wake up
Hill
and realize
on
that
questions
fucking
about the
America fucked up.
CFPB.
I mean, I
We've
guess
heard a
it's
lot
true.
about the
I guess they're being very
CFPB
clever, and they're
here
delaying a
this
lot of the
evening.
cuts and the damage so that it makes
The
Dems
thing
look
that
bad.
I think strikes me most about the CFPB's
You'd
creation
think if it's
is
so
that,
fucking amazing, they'd implement
only
all
in
of it
Washington
immediately.
would we create a federal bureaucracy to fix something that we broke. And
immediately.
I'd like to just submit for the record, Madam Chair, an article by the American Enterprise Institute, October 30th, 2017, a crisis caused by housing policies, not lack of regulation.
You really had to go
Thank
far
you.
back for that, huh, girl?
Because we have the CFPB as a result of a reaction to the banking crisis of 2008, which was driven by housing policies, not by any lack of regulation. And now we've got the CFPB that we live with.
Wow.
And
I can't
as
fucking,
Chairman
I
Hill,
can't deal
you
with this
noted
fucking
that their
bitch.
budget
What
has
the
been
fuck?
expanding.
The 2008 crisis
notably, their
wasn't
budget
caused by a
expanded,
lack of
during
regulation.
the Obama years and declined during the first Trump administration and expanded
Exactly,
again
Andrew, that's a good
during
one.
the Biden years.
What
now
is policy
to
but regulation?
$823 million in fiscal year 25, direct from the Treasury, transfer without having any oversight by the Congress. So we've heard that consumers are going to be left without any protection.
But they're
if we get
setting
rid
it
of
up
the
to be
CFPB,
destroyed
or
even further.
if we decrease their funding to roughly the $250 million that we've set in this budget. Is the CFPB the only federal agency, Chairman Hill, that provides consumer protection?
No, Ms. Alchin, it's not. Each of the bank's supervisory agencies has a robust, continuous exam process for all the consumer compliance requirements. The CFPB's focus in Dodd-Frank was to focus on depository institutions, meaning banks that were larger than $10 billion. Basically, there's 5,000 banks or thereabouts that are smaller than that, and they are having their compliance for lending purposes or deposit purposes fully supervised by the existing bank supervisors. Also, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission,
If the
is
CFPB
deeply involved
did
in
nothing, it would
consumer
not have
responsibilities
recovered,
under
what
the
was it,
securities
$21 billion
laws.
for
And
Americans.
we can't forget the Federal Trade Commission, which
If
is
they
very
could
involved
regulate
in,
themselves,
consumer compliance. And those are the
it wouldn't have
principal federal
recovered
agencies for
$21
consumer
billion
credit, consumer
of
deposit
American consumers'
issues,
money from people that scammed
both,
them.
for banks
Like,
and non-banks.
Jesus Christ.
And then we cannot forget that the states also regulate non-bank consumer finance, and the state's attorney generals enforce those laws. So there's no lack of oversight and consumer
Clearly there
protection in the
is.
financial services space, and therefore that's why, in my judgment, since we're here talking about a reconciliation bill, that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau can complete its statutory tasks under Dodd-Frank with the 5% cap of the Federal Reserve funding. And the two other changes that we made there was simply saying that there's civil penalty fund where they charge wrongdoing and collect funds for the benefit of victims. Once that fund is, the victims are repaid throughout the adjudication process. If there's any surplus money, instead of them being able to keep it, that it go back to the Treasury to benefit the federal budget. And likewise, we say that while they're a unique agency because they have no oversight, they have no congressional appropriation. They have no inspector general. They have no real full compliance with Administrative Procedures Act, for example, in their rulemaking. They've been struck down in the federal courts for overreaching their statute. We also, they have a unique position that once they take their money at their request from the Federal Reserve, they get to carry it over. I don't know a lot of federal agencies that can carry over spending and pile up cash on their balance sheet after September 30 each year. So we cap that in this bill at 5% of that annual budget that they can have.
And in fact, the CFPB has a civil penalty fund sitting on about $2.5 billion, according to my
That's it?
account.
Okay.
1.7 billion of that was a fine levied against one entity, but they can sit on that cash too. Is that correct?
They can. What we argue is that that money should be allocated to settle victims' claims, and that can take some time during the legal process, so that money can certainly sit there. But the money that's not dedicated to paying a victim claim should be returned to the Treasury.
So you mentioned the FTC. I'm glad you mentioned that, because the motto of the Federal Trade Commission is protecting American consumers. In fact, the United States has 12 separate federal financial regulators and state regulators for securities, banking, and insurance. And it is duplicative that we do have the CFPB. We certainly don't need to be funding the CFPB at the extent that we do, because as you mentioned, not only
really
do we have states attorneys general who are also protecting consumers, but we also have plaintiffs' lawyers who can take class action suits as well. Madam Chair, I would like to submit for the record an article dated February 18th, 2025 by the Cato Institute. Consumers will be safe without the CFPB.
Without objection.
In the remaining time that I have, and I've gone over 5 minutes, but I do want to go to my Budget Committee Chair, Mr. Arrington. Just with really one question.
Seeing people
Has
like
the CBO ever been wrong?
Well, in my short tenure, they actually were off in their estimation of the deficit, and their excuse was it was hard to keep up. I'm paraphrasing. It was hard to keep up with the trillions of dollars in spending. Would be $8 trillion total in deficit spending of the last administration, $2 trillion by executive actions. That was what was hard. So let's consider all things. They were off by $1 trillion.
That's it.
Which that's a big miss. And so, yes, they've been wrong. They were wrong in their projections on
that they underestimated it.
Revenue to the Treasury.
They haven't
post-TCJA.
overestimated it.
We had record revenue, record corporate revenue. So they are wrong often, and sometimes they're wrong in an order of magnitude, in one case by $1 trillion.
And if I'm not mistaken, sorry, I went past my second, I went on to a second question, and I'm going to be wrapping up. They underestimated the cost of the IRA, and they underestimated the benefits of Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Is that correct?
Along with underestimating the cost of Obamacare and a whole list of other things, but that is correct. I will say that JCT was the initial scorekeeper or administered the score for the IRA tax credits, green energy tax subsidies.
Exactly. Okay.
And they were.
They're trying to argue that they're overestimating how much they're going to raise the deficit for.
The actual cost.
So all this conversation about how reliant we should be on CBO scores to tell us.
But you just said all the examples you gave
of what we're doing
were that the CBO underestimated the cost of shit.
Reliable and as
you dumb fucks.
That's correct. And if I may, Ms. Houchin, I'd say that
when the fuck have Republicans ever come in under budget on anything? Like, seriously. They're literally spending more money. They've spent more money in the last few months than were spent last year in the same amount of months.
Biden. I thought that was the responsible thing to do, which forced us as a conference to put these gentlemen in the position, among other
not even the 1950s,
authorizing chairman, to dig deep
They weren't
on
in
rooting
control
out
in the
waste
1950s.
in this, the people's
They
government.
fucked up the
I'm very
country so
proud
badly that after the
again,
Great
it's
Depression,
reducing the deficit,
Democrats had
by
control
about
for almost
175
like 60
billion. We need
years
to do
of
more. We need
Congress.
to rinse and repeat future reconciliation bills. But the debt to GDP
Both
going down
fish.
by 10 percentage points is, in this environment, and over the last couple of decades is just probably unfathomable, but we've achieved it. I'm convinced we will achieve it and then some. Because we're not adding tariff revenue, we're not adding other things that I believe will happen because
I thought
the
tariff
iron will of,
revenue was
of
off.
this president
The
on
tariff.
that
I thought
front,
you
if
fucking
not on
dropped the
others.
tariffs.
Thank you.
And
Thank
the
you so much
tariffs were
to
going to
the,
get you some
witnesses for your
fucking
long hours of
deal.
testimony. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Halchik. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't know whether to say, buenos dias, good night. We don't really have a word in either Spanish or
Right.
English when you start at 1 a.m. and when you finally start asking
I like her
questions
vibe.
at 4 a.m. But it is still nighttime. And Americans, some of them looking, we have 150 people outside
we're
standing
looking.
in the rain asking us to do the right thing. I want to do a shout out to
Hell
them.
yeah.
But
Hell
Americans
yeah.
might have
Shout
just
out to the
woken
people
up
standing
and they
out
don't
there.
know what's happening. But let me tell you, it's a nightmare, right? We are living through a nightmare. And if you are a veteran, if you are a
All right,
pregnant mother,
guys,
if you live in rural America,
I want to keep watching, but
this
I gotta get to
is
sleep. I gotta get a few hours.
Republican nightmare.
Excuse me, of sleep so I can
Because
wake up in the
this
morning and
bill
like
that
report
they
a
are
little bit
gonna
on
be
this.
pushing through in the dead of night.
If anything crazy happens,
the
please
biggest
DM me.
transfer of wealth from
Please let me
the
know.
poor, working families and middle class to the
This is
wealthy.
cspan.org. If you
And
want to go watch it live,
CBO put
you
it
can
out.
keep watching it.
Now, they don't
Highly
want to
recommend it.
pay
I'm
attention
sorry,
to
I can't.
CBO
Hang on.
because
They said
don't
they
like
expect
the
to go
facts,
until at least like
right?
10 a.m.
They don't like
So
what it actually looks like.
have fun with
But
that.
we know that these numbers are horrible.
Let me know if
and
anything
we'll get
crazy
into
happens,
them
though. I'd
in a
love to
bit.
know. For
But
tomorrow.
when we think about this transfer of wealth,
and
especially
watch my
this
latest
part here, it
TikTok
gets
and
me.
share it far
It
and wide,
really
please.
gets me. There we go.
Thank
from
you.
the lowest
Thank you all, guys. It's lovely.
decile to the
Lovely
highest
hanging out with you
that
guys.
CBO
while
put out.
the world while the
And
country
many of the
crumbles around
people
us.
in this room are people of faith. And they might have heard when John the Baptist actually said that if you have two tunics, you should give one away.